Ready when you are. Hello and welcome to the Issaquah City Council Committee of the Whole for July 23rd, 2019. Today, Council President Tola Martz is excused unexpectedly, and so is Council Deputy President Mariah Batiste. She's also excused. So the rest of us are here, and we're going to make do with this. We have a busy agenda. We have 5 items on the agenda, and the first of which is ID 0506, Evaluation of Progress with Resolutions on Inclusion and Condemnation, Racism and Intolerance, Condemning Racism and Intolerance. And this is going to be presented by David Fujimoto, our Director of Office Sustainability. David, thank you and welcome.
Good evening. Just a moment, please. Okay, once again, David Fujimoto, Director of the Office of Sustainability here at the city. I'm here tonight to provide some information for Council's discussion in response to direction provided to the administration earlier this year on a resolution that was passed in regards to racism, discrimination, and intolerance. You might recall that back in April, I think it was actually on April 1st, Resolution 2019-03 was passed in condemnation of racism, discrimination, and related acts of violence. The city does have a long history of supporting diversity, inclusion, tolerance, cultural awareness, and safety in the community. This resolution was one of several kind of acts, if you will, in support of those community values and beliefs. Earlier this year, when the city passed this resolution, it was following some events that occurred in the Klahani neighborhood of Sammamish, as well as some acts of violence in Christchurch, New Zealand. With that resolution earlier this year, it included several different pieces. It made a declaration of condemnation and of hate and terror and violence. Encourage compassion, religious freedom, and peace. It also renewed and restated items from an earlier resolution dating back to 2002. And that resolution similarly followed some acts of violence from the September 11th terrorist attacks of 2001. With the resolution that was adopted in April of this year, the City Council also directed the administration to come back within 4 months to provide a proposal for how the city might go about evaluating that 2002 resolution. So that's why I'm here tonight. The actual language from the motion from the City Council is up on the screen as well. Going back to the resolution 2002-009, that resolution was titled urging city officials and staff, school district, and all citizens to work to reduce intolerance towards others of different backgrounds and beliefs. As I stated before, that this resolution was actually passed on April 1st, 2002, so it's exactly 17 years prior to the resolution that was passed earlier this year. Specifically, this resolution in 2002 urged all city departments and the Issaquah School District to direct appropriate attention and resources to support state and local efforts to do a variety of things. This included reducing intolerance and hate crimes, providing support to communities that were targeted by hate crimes, ensuring proper procedures for reporting crimes are in place and that they're understood by the community, welcoming and fostering positive interactions among peoples and cultures in the community. And it did a couple of kind of specific things as well, and it proclaimed the city a hate-free zone. It encouraged and supported the city's continued efforts to support the Human Rights Day, which is typically observed on December 10th. It's a day that was originally proclaimed through the United Nations. It's been something that's been in place for more than 70 years. And then it also urged fellow residents to exercise tolerance and understanding. The resolution at that time did not outline a specific kind of process for evaluating the resolution or reporting on it, nor did it indicate any kind of performance measures to indicate progress with it. In considering how the administration might go about evaluating the 2002 resolution, the city has, the administration laid out an approach where we would kind of take a look at a couple of different parts and summarize the results in a report. In order to evaluate the progress towards Resolution 2002-09, the city would take an approach where we would inventory some of the actions that have taken place since that time, whether those be programs or activities by the city and the school district, policy modifications and implementation that may have occurred over that time, and as well as other resolutions or official statements that may have been made by the city. We would also take an approach that would take a look at some of the data that may be available over that time span, thinking about community indicators, some data through our police department, for example, hate crimes, formal complaints, other data. We also have some data in more recent years from things such as the National Community Survey. Where possible, we could identify local trends as well as regional trends so that we have a basis for comparing those against. And finally, we could also consider some qualitative data if we wanted to try and understand kind of the lived experience behind the data in the current community to get a little bit more of an insight into the current situation. The summary report would take a look at both of these pieces. We would anticipate that it would largely be a historical perspective of actions and data trends where that data is available, and that we could consider it also within the context of a larger framework if we wanted to think about kind of the best practices that might be applied to a community such as ours and how we are doing in different areas. But such a consideration probably is going to be more helpful if there were interest in looking at an approach going forward. Clearly, evaluating a resolution that's 17 years old has a number of limitations. As I mentioned before, the 2002 resolution specified a few specific actions, but was largely absent any kind of specific objectives to undertake. And as a result, there were no performance measures or objectives clearly outlined. The data is expected to be relatively limited, both within the data that's available from community activities, whether from the city or from the school district. We have not taken the time to investigate the full aspect of data available through our police department, but we do know that there is data that's available in different shapes and forms with different levels of accessibility specific to these types of crimes, and so there may be some limitations there as well. And then finally, because there are so many activities related to this particular topic happening throughout the region, as well as nationally, in fact, and statewide, correlating any kind of results or local actions with what's happening with some of that data would be very difficult to do with any kind of certainty. So in terms of recommendations from the administration, and I should also state, in terms of thinking about the resource requirements that would be needed in order to do an evaluation, we're anticipating that this would take between 150 to 350 hours of staff time, depending on what approach we might take with this. There's a couple of different options for how we could go about doing this work, but just to give you a sense of the effort that would be involved. Our recommendations, however, are a little bit more specific. We know that the 2002 resolution provides some specific direction in a couple of different areas, but really, as I stated before, the limitations would make it difficult to kind of assess the performance of the 2002 or the progress of the 2002 resolution with any amount of precision. The 2002 resolution did, importantly, I think, communicate some values to the community at a time of distress. And that's, resolutions have a variety of purposes in the community in terms of conveying the city council and the city's intent and conveying community beliefs. And that they do have those values in and of themselves. And so that would be an area where we would recommend that the city continue to follow that course of action and consider the resolutions within that context, rather than trying to have any kind of additional specific actions directly tied to that by itself. There is a larger body of work that is underway in the city. City staff have increased its efforts in equity and cultural competency work over recent years. We have a team right now that's participating in something called the Government Alliance for Racial Equity, for example, and doing a body of work related to this. And so there's a way in which that some of this work could be nested in the future and considered as part of actions and performance reporting. So we would recommend considering it in that context. And then finally, there are some pieces where there are some direct linkages to the recently adopted citywide strategic plan, and additional potential actions could be considered under some of those objectives that have already been outlined, specifically under city leadership and services. And with that, that is the summary.
Thank you, David. How do we want to start this off? Does anybody have any questions for David? Councilmember Hunt?
Sounded like there were both, so I'm trying to clarify some of the things that you said, because it sounded like there was both sort of limited things that you thought could be done in terms of quantifying the effect on the different issues that were identified in the two resolutions, but then you also said it would take approximately 350 hours, up to 350 hours, I believe. So I think it would be helpful to have a little more clarity around what that 350 hours would entail, if there's also limited things that you think can be done to quantify these.
I should say, I think there are limitations to the data and what we would find as a result of doing that work. So for example, we'd anticipate, in order to understand the various activities that had been undertaken since 2002, we'd need to do some inventory work. That would be both an inventory of actions and policies that the city may have undertaken. The resolution from 2002 also spoke specifically to the school district, so that would be taking a look at some of their policies and changes that have happened over that time. And then also within the community, what activities have happened, to get a sense of the variety of actions, if you will, or policy changes that may have been implemented over that time frame. So there's a body of work just doing some of that inventory work. Similarly, we've only laid out the process for this. We haven't actually gone to do the work of evaluating the data sources. Just on a preliminary basis, we know that the police department does keep a variety of statistics on crime data, but the accessibility through their database has its own kind of quirks, and it would take some effort to sort through that. Also producing data that could be compared to regional numbers or statewide numbers would take a bit of effort. So, but I think the limitation is there will be the reliability of the data and the ability to correlate the actions to whatever the trends might show would have its limitations.
Any other questions for David? Councilmember.
So David, what would you consider the low-hanging fruit as far as easy data to access that might be something that we could look at? While it might not correlate back to actions that we've done, is there some sort of data coming back to this subject that might be the easiest to access?
I think that the data set that that would be easiest to kind of try and understand would be hate crimes, or malicious harassment is what it is. That there has been a significant increase in hate crimes, both nationally and statewide in King County. How that data is kept and reported on is a little bit trickier, because there is malicious harassment and there's kind of bias-related crimes. My understanding, however, though, is that without having pulled the data of those numbers, the police department would expect those numbers to be very, very low, on the order of 0 to 1 over the course of several years. So that would provide you with some information, but certainly that wouldn't kind of provide some additional granularity in terms of the different kind of other interests that would be associated with the resolution. But that's the most immediate one that comes to mind.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Ray?
So I'm not sure if this is a question or a statement, but I'm going to put a question mark at the end of it, so it'll be a question. So the intent, as I recall, of this discussion was to really help us, instead of making proclamations and resolutions that were kind of toothless, I mean, just a statement of what we desired, was just to come back and say, what could we do? Because we believe strongly in the needs identified in this resolution. And I understand the desire to analyze the data, but I was really kind of hoping when we got to this point to get something back in the form of, here are some things that we can do to take positive action to reduce hate crimes and violence and terror and the underlying problems that we've identified. So, I mean, are there things that we look to do that we can actually take a positive step in terms of moving forward the intent of the resolution? Because I thought that's what we were looking for, not just data on how are we doing, but I thought we were looking for more positive steps on moving forward.
Thank you, and I believe City Administrator Moon is going to respond.
Okay.
Thank you. I just want to clarify, those of you I can't see, I'm sorry. I just want to clarify that the intent of the direction that was given to city staff was just as David had on that initial slide, and that was to report back on how we might go about evaluating level of success, our ability to implement the actions that were specified in that resolution from 2002. So it was just to identify what level of effort and what method we would use to quantify our impact based on the conditions in that resolution. So that's what David has attempted to do tonight. Councilmember Ray, to your point though about how might we really be proactive about making a difference on the issues that have been raised in these resolutions over the past. I think we are likewise wanting to focus on the future rather than look back and spend our time and efforts, as the second bullet suggests, on tracking our current efforts, our future efforts, measuring how successful they are on creating the kind of welcoming community that we all want to have. We also have some strategic plan objectives along those lines and are hoping to put our time and energy into those.
All right, thank you. Councilmember Goodman.
So David, can you tell us what you're looking for from us tonight?
So I think we are tasked with providing a proposal for how we might go about evaluating the 2002 resolution. And so if we wanted to provide that approach to you here tonight, along with a recommendation. And I think as the City Administrator Moon had articulated, our recommendation is really to think about the resolution as a kind of an opportunity for a statement of values, and then the action plans and the forward-looking part of it, I think is best situated in a different context. And so I think we're looking for feedback on whether or not you agree with that approach, or if you would like to see us go and undertake the work of evaluating the 2002 resolution.
Okay, so on number one, I'm not sure how the recommendation is different from what we do already. Consider resolutions on those issues where the city, and it seems like it's the city council, deems it important to communicate. It seems like we've done that, and then the motion on April 1st, the council direction on April 1st was kind of in response to the multiple resolutions. So how is number one different from what we already do?
I think in the memo it actually says continue to consider resolutions.
Yeah.
The other consideration, if you, as a part of that, could be taking the opportunity to evaluate the guidelines around when resolutions are issued and under what circumstances. And similarly, other statements like proclamations could be, some kind of guidelines could be developed.
So guidelines seems to be more appropriate to me, to give council members the opportunity to have a framework for making decisions and thinking about resolutions that might be appropriate. And I think one of the reasons that that's helpful is because over the years, it's a rotating bunch, and I just think that kind of framework is helpful for whatever decision making that we make. So my feedback would be if we had not just to continue to consider, because that's just same thing going forward. It doesn't change anything. I think we would need guidelines. That's my feedback on number one. And then number two, I don't know how I think we have to have some sort of a baseline before we forward think. One thing you said earlier was the malicious, what was it, malicious harassment?
Harassment, correct.
There were some interesting articles about that 2 or 3 months ago, and how some of those definitions have changed that have potentially caused the numbers to go up in some areas. So I think that information, when this type of topic comes back, I think it's really important for the council and the public to understand what's behind those numbers. I don't, but I read the articles that made me think that there was more information that we would need to understand what's behind the numbers and the increase. But I thought you said earlier that if we were to get that information from the police department, it would be, our numbers here would be really, really low. Is that what you said?
That's without having pulled the data, but just based on initial conversations, that was the feedback provided.
Okay. Well, I guess my feedback would be that I'm, 350 hours at 40 hours is like 9 weeks of work. And I don't know that the city can afford to set aside that kind of time right now. But I think it would be interesting to see what kind of low-hanging fruit there is. And based on the resolutions, if we could figure out what was most important behind those resolutions when we made those resolutions, and then pick out a couple of those important items, do gather some data, because I think it's important to know where we were and where we are now, to the extent that we can figure that out. And only then can we get some kind of idea about what changes we might need to make, what policies we might need to pass, what we might need to do. But I think we do have to do some evaluation. We can't just go forward and just kind of blindly, because if we really have almost no malicious harassment issue in the city, and I don't know that that's true, but if it's really, really low, maybe that's not something that we start with. I just don't know. But we're passing these resolutions, so I think we need to figure out, just like Councilmember Ray said, we need something with teeth, and I'm not opposed to, or maybe we do it another way. I mean, maybe we need to espouse our values in other ways just than resolutions every 17 years.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. First, David, I appreciate that you did follow the letter of the resolution back from this April 1st. Like, look at, make a proposal. I mean, that's very clear, and you put it up there and you demonstrated that. We asked specifically to come back with a proposal for how to analyze and evaluate the progress made since that 2002 resolution. As I thought about this, I really began to question, why look back? I think I do agree with something that Stacy said that really resonated with me. It's one thing to know what the basis for these resolutions have been, what motivated them, what happened either locally on the national stage or the world stage that motivated the council then, and as we did earlier this year, to do such a resolution. But I like what you said earlier about the current program that many of the staff are involved with, the Government Alliance on Race and Equity. I think that's good, but it seems, and I also want to thank Councilmember Goodman for actually bringing it up in the first place. We were making one of these statements, these proclamations, and like, okay, is this just all talk and no walk? And I think that was a good call. I'm not so convinced that looking back is of a lot of value, rather than taking a stock and look at programs and ideas on what we can do from this point going forward. And I think that's what you're kind of talking about here. I think the overall awareness within staff is growing, especially through this program, on what kind of factors could be at play here. And I think there's a real spirit in all of these resolutions, including our most recent one. I I think talking about actions and programs going forward to capture and to actually act upon those, to me, would also be a good response to the spirit of the resolution we made this last April. So I'm kind of in the mind of looking forward and don't spend as much time and resources doing an accounting of what's happened in the past.
Agreed.
Councilmember Hunt?
I think one part of this that's important would be the inventory, because I think it would be helpful to know what actions the city is doing and what actions the city could do. So that's not, I don't think, a very data-intensive activity. It's more just the process of inventorying what we do and where we could add different programs. And I think that also aligns with my understanding of some of the original intent of looking back at the 2002 resolution, which had a number of actions that were in that resolution that the city was resolved to do, such as working with young people, community groups, and local organizations to assure procedures for reporting such crimes are in place and understood. So just that we not only did we make resolutions communicating our values, but we actually did resolve to take certain actions in that resolution. And so I think it would be helpful to have an inventory of those actions and then an inventory of what other actions we could do. So it's not so data intensive in my mind, but it would give us a bigger picture.
Any other comments from the council? So David, you've got a spectrum of comments to consider.
I do.
And so what will be, I'm not sure, this is normally information exchange. This is the committee of the whole of what we do. There's no action in front of us other than to give you our feedback. And individually, as you can hear, there's a range of opinions. So I think as a next step, any suggestions, staff?
Sure. I think maybe we'll huddle now and discuss what we've heard. I think we need to evaluate how much staff time. We've heard comments about limiting that. I heard that. So let us go back, kind of quantify what level of effort might be needed to provide some of the requests that we heard tonight, and any trade-offs that we think we might need to make on the work plan. So we can report back at a future meeting on our game plan on that, or advise the council through email.
Okay, thank you. I think that's the best we can do at this point. Thank you very much, David. We'll move on to the second agenda item. So that item, which was scheduled for 15 minutes, took 30.
Right on track.
Ethan, you're up next. Welcome.
Thank you.
So this is ID 0482, Neighborhood Engagement Update. Nissan, over to you.
Great.
Hello.
Good evening, council members and the members of the public that are here and those that are watching. Thank you for allowing me the time to present this evening. I am Lisa Ngouge, the Neighborhood Engagement Coordinator for the city, and I'm here to provide you an update on the program. So for some of you that may not have been there, and as a reminder, in 2015 at the Issaquah City Council's goal-setting retreat, we heard from community leaders that they wanted more engagement at the neighborhood level. So Issaquah's Neighborhood Engagement Program was founded in 2017 with the goals to create participation, build trust, improve efficiency, engage and enhance two-way communication, provide additional venues for information sharing, to build trust, strengthen neighborhoods, create partnerships between electeds, the city, and the residents that it serves. And I'd also like to point out that I think this program aligns well with our newly adopted strategic plan, including the guiding principles of people by fostering community pride, engagement, strong and safe neighborhoods, and diverse opportunities. I also think it aligns with service excellence by delivering proactive, efficient, and effective public services for residents. So early on in this program, I asked residents what they wanted to see when it came to engagement, and they told me they wanted informal meetings, they want 1 to 2 hour meetings at opportune times, They want the opportunity to network, meaning that they wanted to hear what's happening in other neighborhoods as well as the city as a whole. They also wanted us to leverage neighborhood champions, which I found out neighborhoods communicate and connect very differently, and having well-connected residents that can help us leverage our communication and information channels is invaluable. They also said to take engagement to them, make it easier for them to attend and give their feedback, and also use the time that they give to us efficiently by packaging up engagement opportunities if needed. So along with some of the neighborhood meetings described in the original council goal, the city's neighborhood engagement program includes other communication tools to further expand the outreach. The list of tools may vary over time depending on success and also when they're needed. So meetings, Nextdoor, which is a social media platform that we use specific to residents that live here in Issaquah, which I'll get to later in my presentation. Social media, maps, such as the active projects map, which we have added now renderings of different projects on that recently. Any updates, which are news items, such as your traffic alerts, development updates. The engagement toolkit, which I'll also update you on later. Infographics, videos, the neighborhood menu, which was attachment A in your report. And also proactive versus reactive development engagement and utilizing those neighborhood champions like I mentioned earlier. So also throughout the creation of this program, I talked to council, and what I heard was the desire for this program to be proactive, to close the communication loop, which is why I'm here today, to create partnerships with the community, to reach those that are not engaged or hard to engage with, and provide opportunities to meet with residents and learn what's going on. So like I said, part of giving feedback is closing the loop, which is done in a variety of ways, not only just in my presentation to you today. Now, although I'm going to give you an overview here in a little bit of what currently is happening in each neighborhood, and more specifically, feedback is presented through project updates, memos, agenda bills, in-person engagement, surveys, and along with this dynamic map that also provides an overview of what we heard when making touch points with the community that's also updated in real time when we have those. So onto our neighborhoods here in Issaquah. What started out as using the sub-area map has now turned into 12 neighborhoods. In early outreach, I realized that some of the neighborhoods, like for example, some of the neighborhoods along Newport Way Northwest, like your Spyglass, your Oak Crest, Sammamish Hills, is also, they identify more with Newport versus Montreux or Central Issaquah, which is what they would fall within in the sub-area plan. The same goes for South Cove, which is also considered Greenwood Point in the sub-area plan, and they consider themselves more of a South Cove community. So I'm going to go through each neighborhood, and I'm going to provide a brief synopsis of what's going on, what's next, and what we're hearing. So what you're going to see on the slides is what we're hearing, but I'm going to go through, like I said, some of the projects, some of the milestones, just some information about those neighborhoods, and then also kind of what's next. But please keep in mind that everything that I point out, it's not everything going on in the neighborhood, it's just an overview. So I just picked a few things for you to hear tonight. So first up is Old Town. Some of the engagement efforts and projects that we have done is traffic calming, which we implemented early in 2018, which we heard was something that the neighborhood really wanted. The picture on the slide is from the neighborhood walkabout, which was very well attended. We're right in the middle of the Darst pilot closure that started last fall. So we're working closely with the Issaquah School District to kind of figure out how we can alleviate traffic on 2nd Avenue and also cut through traffic through this neighborhood. They just took out the old skate park this year. That was a demolition. And then 2nd and Bush, we made some crossing enhancements after hearing from residents that they wanted us to look at that intersection to make some improvements. So going back to what we've heard, obviously traffic is a challenge. 2nd Avenue does get pretty backed up, especially during school. And like I said, part of the what's next is the city is working with the school district, again, to come up with some of those plans, and then we'll update the neighborhood from there. What's next again for Old Town? The Creek Corridor outreach currently happening right now. The pavement management program, which they were paving today. And then as part of the Old Town plan code changes that were adopted, we're tracking the next step, which is going to be the architectural guideline outreach. So moving on to Central Issaquah, some of the engagement efforts and the projects there would be the Gilman Corridor project, the Maple to Sunset project that's currently underway that you'll start hearing about, the Vale Apartments completion expected this year, the Southeast 62nd Street completion, obviously with the little undercrossing open again. The EIS Lake Sammamish State Park scoping, which is in in hand with the 12th Avenue Northwest and 17th Avenue Northwest intersection at SR 900 that we hear often that that's a problem of congestion in an intersection and a hard one to navigate. And also Costco beginning their development. So some of what we heard, obviously traffic is a challenge, especially around that one intersection. We've also heard that Southeast 62nd's providing more alleviation in the congestion around that area. And also rent is really expensive. Even though we've added a couple more units to the central Issaquah area, that we're still hearing that rent's pretty expensive. So what's next for central Issaquah? The transit orient development and ongoing project outreach would include obviously Costco. So on to Squaw Mountain. Right now, Squaw Mountain we've had a focus group that's been dealing with this Squaw-Tallis Community Connection, which is part of a Metro program. So we've been working with them for almost 2 years. We're getting close to implementation. The goal behind that was getting residents who live in Squaw and Tallis down to the valley floor so they can much easier connect to different areas. Also, I've attended the Woods annual HOA meeting. And right now, Kalkari Phase 2 construction has just begun, so letting Squaw Mountain know about that. Some of the things we've heard from that annual meeting and from other residents is that they're concerned over speeding on 12th Avenue Northwest, and they're also wanting to stay connected with their neighbors. So Squaw Mountain doesn't have a lot of formalized HOAs, and so they're trying to find ways to connect with each other. What's next for Squaw Mountain? The dog park at Tibbetts Valley Park, some of the creek corridor and the master planning going on right now, the future of the Inniswood multifamily parcel, and the Squaw-Tallis, like I said, community connection implementation. So moving on to the neighborhood of Sycamore. We have done extensive outreach the past 9 months regarding the possibility of a sewer extension into Sycamore, including an open house, some 3 letters, postcards, and over 20 one-on-one meetings that I've also attended with engineering staff. And also, they're affected by Kalkari Phase 2 beginning as well. So some of the things I've heard in that neighborhood, they're concerned over cost and development if sewer is implemented. They're also concerned over no striping on their neighborhood roads. What I've heard is there's brush lining on both sides of the roads, and so people tend to drive towards the middle. And they're also concerned about speeding, which kind of all goes hand in hand with that no striping on those neighborhood roads. So what's next for this neighborhood? Sewer extension's been postponed, but we'll continue to stay engaged as these conversations continue over time. And then just monitoring developer communication closely with the Sycamore neighborhood and those that are surrounded. So on to Newport. Some of the projects and engagement efforts with that right now are the State Route 900 to Southeast 54th corridor design. Some of the ongoing development updates and road impacts. There's a lot of development projects, private, that are going on in that particular neighborhood, and keeping them updated on when those are going to be completed and kind of what their impacts are going to be. And future plans for Bergsma. So what have we heard from that neighborhood? I've heard concern over current road capacity. I've also heard that they're concerned that once we move that SR 900 and Southeast 54th Street project to a 90% design, that they're worried about how we're going to fund it. I've also heard requests for a traffic calming device at Oakcrest, and I've heard strong opposition from existing residents over a sidewalk east of the trailhead on the Bergsma side. So Newport can look forward to a 90% design for the SR 900 to the Southeast 54th Street project. On the horizon would be Riva frontage improvements, the King County Trailhead parking expansion anticipated to come in 2020. Construction anticipated to finish for Anthology and Gateway Senior. And this neighborhood, I anticipate, will be affected by the WashDOT I-90 auxiliary lane project that will come this fall. So on to Montreux. I attended their annual HOA meeting. They have a desire, which is what I heard, to be more connected with the city. So they have appointed a government affairs chair that I now meet with regularly, so we can get some more city news to them more often. Also, they were interested in Map Your Neighborhood planning, which is part of getting to know some of your neighbors and also feeling prepared when a disaster strikes, which came out of the snowstorm in February. So some of the other things I've heard was they were concerned over the King County Trailhead construction and if and when it will happen. And like I said, more desire to be connected with each other through the CERT, Map Your Neighborhood, and also desire to be informed of city news. Some of the things that are next for this community would be the WashDOT auxiliary lane project, which will probably at some points put more traffic in that general area. And then also the neighborhood block party coming up for them, which is in September 7th. So on to the Issaquah Highlands, some of the efforts and projects that we've done in the Highlands. We write connection articles monthly for their newspaper that goes to all of the residents in the Highlands. I also meet monthly with the Highlands Council. We've worked very closely with the Highlands on traffic calming. We have provided new signage on the streets. We've also painted some of the roads up there. We've helped with an educational campaign. We've also partnered with the IHCA, the Highlands Council, to get crosswalk flags there. And another highlight from the Highlands neighborhood would be the police fire and open house that we had in April. There were over 200 attendees. So some of the things that we've heard lately from the Highlands, they're concerned about more frequent power outages. They're also still concerned about some speeding in their neighborhood. And they're also worried about illegal parking. So what's next for the Highlands? We've got Highlands Day coming up on the 24th. The theme is Game On. I just talked to Nina this morning, and she said that this event is attended by 4,000 to 5,000 people. So the neighborhood engagement booth will be there. The theme this year is Minecraft for us. So we've asked for our Highlands neighbors to create their neighborhood block in Minecraft and submit it prior to the event. And we also have a neighborhood visioning meeting coming up in November. So on to North Issaquah, which is Overdale. We've attended the annual Overdale HOA meeting. I've also met with some of the Rivenwood neighborhood on fire lanes. There was confusion over what is a fire lane, how far can I park, when can I park. So met with some of the neighborhood and the president of the HOA out there with Commander Polishwan. So like I said, we've heard that they're interested in potential septic system testing changes if we pursue those, and they're also, like I said, worried about some of the parking. So Providence Point, I think the big effort there is Southeast 43rd signalization project. We've heard support for it, certainly, over time. And then concern over Providence Heights becoming a school. They're concerned over the noise and congestion that might bring. They're also concerned over speeding, and I've heard consistently since I've been there, they're worried about overdevelopment in the city as a whole and where we put it. So what's next is going to be the 43rd Way signalization outreach and staying in touch with that neighborhood about impacts. So on to Talus. Some of the engagement efforts, projects, milestones would be the Bergsma purchase. Parcel 9, we send periodic updates to the community restabilization. Also, I attended the Issaquah School District community meeting regarding plans for the new middle school. I attend quarterly HMA meetings, and they also are going to be affected by the Squawk-Talus Community Connection with Metro. And their Easter egg hunt is a great event that the mayor went to this year. So what have we heard from Talus? We've heard concerns over congestion on Talus Drive, especially with the potential new middle school coming in. We've also heard concern over speeding, heard concern over construction traffic and trucks on those roads and how they are going to be managed with some of the stabilization with Parcel 9 and also with the new middle school. I've also heard that they want removal of the plastic on Parcel 9, and I've heard their concern with potential new development on Parcel 7 and 8. So what's next for Talus? They have an annual meeting this year that we'll be attending, typically in the fall, and then they have National Night Out coming up, which we will be at. And I'm continuing to track the permitting process for the new middle school, so there will be engagement on that. And then the Squawk-Talus Community Connection implementation, like I mentioned earlier. And last, South Cove. So some of the engagement efforts, projects going on in this community. Now that we've annexed South Cove, we're working to make infrastructure improvements for these residents. And so that's included the card that you see on the screen behind me. I went to their Easter egg hunt this year because this community's been affected not only this year, but will be for the next few years with these infrastructure improvements. So making sure that they know where to go to sign up for updates is what this handout helped me to do, and neighbors passed it along to other neighbors as well. Check in regularly with board members there as well. They were looking at the Northwest Mammoth Road improvements, and then the Washdot Auxiliary Lane project is something that will be affecting this neighborhood the most, and then Blackberry Park, which is something that we acquired about 2 years ago. So what have we heard? The community wants improved multimodal connections to Issaquah, and on a positive, we've heard that the infrastructure improvements are going well, and they do feel informed. So what's next for this neighborhood? The Washdot Auxiliary Lane project. This neighborhood will be the most affected by this project, which will start in the summer and fall. and some of the Blackberry Park improvements, and then ongoing pavement management program paving. So along with neighborhood meetings, there's also community events that happen annually in each neighborhood. Here's a sample of events that we try to attend each year. And I think these events are a great way to connect where people already are, which is not only a program goal, but what I heard was a desire of council. So Nextdoor is one of the communication tools I mentioned earlier that we use. We launched Nextdoor in March 1st of 2017. As you can see, there's been a growing number of users, which is equated to about 6,351 since we started. And as background for everyone and a reminder, as an agency, we cannot see the dialogue between neighbors. We can only see messages when they comment on our posts or if they send us a private message. So a unique thing about Nextdoor versus other outreach platforms is that you have to have a verified Issaquah address in order to sign up. So that ensures that we're communicating with residents that live here, that have an address here in Issaquah. And so we use this platform to geo-target different messages and events to send alerts and more. And so every time we make a post, an email is sent to the user signed up. So I see it as not just a passive way to communicate, but it directs them to a longer message or perhaps a link to our website, a survey, or more information. And as you can see in this slide, our top neighborhood users in the city, it hasn't changed much since 2017 when we began. However, I do have some more information that the most engaged neighborhood in 2017 was, meaning that those that interact with us and others the most, was actually Tallis. This year, the neighborhood that's engaged the most, and mind you, we're only halfway through the year, is actually Squawk. So I kind of dug into that, and I attribute that to maybe the lack of the organized HOAs in that particular neighborhood, and hearing from them the desire to have more neighborhood connections. And so I feel like they're using Nextdoor as a platform to do that with each other. So when this program was also in its inception, a more proactive approach to development was also identified as a need. We heard constantly from residents that development was beginning and they weren't clear on what was being built or what the impacts were going to be to them. So we've been working with developers since 2017 to create improved signage that they pay for, put up, and maintain. And as an example, before construction or site work begins, we work with the developer to create a construction notification sign with the project rendering and pertinent information, such as project overview, some of the bigger ticket items, excavating, things like that, and then a 24-hour contact that doesn't just go to an answering service, and when it's anticipated to be completed. So the sign is installed on site in a visible place, where if you're driving by, you can see it. If you're walking by, you can certainly see it. And we've also asked them to install a realtor box underneath it. And so the developer is then given a template that they can provide monthly updates to interested parties, and they're also asked to maintain a contact list for when they send these out. In addition to emailed, we ask that they also print these out and put them in that box that's secured underneath that sign. And so outside of the monthly updates, special permits or significant impacts to residents are also emailed to subscribers and printed for the on-site box. So I wanted to give you a couple examples. I've talked a little bit about Kalkari that has started construction, so the sign is up at the construction site. Gives you the project description, again, the 24-hour contact, the work hours. So if residents see anything, they can certainly call the contact or give them their information. And this is also an example of what that monthly development update looks like. This one we just sent to Poplar, which is an office building that Rowley's building in the Central Issaquah district. So in addition to asking developers to communicate more frequently and effectively, I've worked to put together some timelines of impacts in neighborhoods that are most affected, so like your Newport Way and your Tallis right now, to help paint the picture of what's happening and how long certain projects might take. So at the beginning of each year, staff does get together to discuss major projects, both city and private development. And in doing so, I'm able to take that list and use a neighborhood lens to start creating these timelines that show impacts in highly affected neighborhoods, such as, like I said, the Tallis and Newport neighborhood, in order to begin to kind of figure out touch points that we might need along the way in each community. So internally, as our best practice, staff's been focusing this year on using the engagement toolkit, which was established in 2017. The toolkit provides strategies to assist project managers in developing customized engagement plans. It also sets a common language across departments as we strive to develop effective engagement programs, especially including identifying what phase the project is in. Are we collaborating with the community? Are we consulting with the community? Or are we sharing with the community? In addition, the staff has also been working to standardize the type of public meetings outlined in the Issaquah's Public Engagement Toolkit. I think this ensures that the community and staff have the same understanding of meeting format and participation. For example, a workshop with active group participation versus an open house with more one-on-one engagement. And this is an example of what those signs that residents will begin seeing at city-run events, in addition to notifications that would also mirror the same outline. So a couple ways we track metrics in this program are by the numbers, the number of interactions in person, and through email, as you see on the screen behind me. Other ways we track metrics, which are included in your report, are through the National Citizen Survey, Nextdoor, which I've shared with you earlier, and social media online interactions. So in addition to metrics, I feel there's also success in creation of relationships, which is one of the program's goals and also one of council's desires that I heard earlier. I wanted to share that about 2 months ago, I heard from a contact in South Cove that he was talking with his neighbor about all the infrastructure improvements that were going on. And his neighbor had a question, and he said, you know, there's somebody at the city that you can call. And before he finished his sentence, she said my name, and she said, I know who she is. So I share this because I think becoming recognizable within the community as someone that is a familiar face or a trusted city contact is essential to the continued success of this program. So what's next? I'm continuing to grow the program in relation to the program goals along with council feedback. Some of the ways I'm doing this and I'm working on creating a welcome kit for new residents to help educate them about Issaquah, how they can get involved both at a city level and at a broader level. Once completed at the end of 2019, this kit will be available online and in print form. I'm also working on evolving the neighborhood arts grant program. So last year I partnered with the Arts Commission. We piloted a neighborhood arts program, and the Issaquah Highlands did receive a grant to add safety messages to sidewalks that only appears when it rains. So there was interest in other neighborhood projects last year, and the team and residents, we encountered hurdles in granting funds to individuals due to taxes mostly, versus established HOAs with formal budgets and passing that burden on to an individual. So as a next step, I'm researching options of piloting mini grants, less than $500, which would avoid the tax hurdles that we ran into and may increase some interest around that. I'm also looking into cultural diversity. The neighborhood program has been successful establishing relationships at the neighborhood level. So as a next step, the communications team in partnership with the human services coordinator, we're brainstorming ideas to build upon our current partnerships with Cultural Bridges, the Highlands Cultural Groups, and others within the community to form stronger relationships with these community groups. I'm also looking to develop new neighborhood-specific web pages. The communications team is working on a website redesign, which should be done by the end of this year. So by adding neighborhood-specific web pages that we haven't had before, so I'm working on those. And also on block parties, working on to increase neighborliness and encourage neighbors to organize events. I'm working on best practices for block parties and how to make it easier for residents to get permits. Some of the roadblocks that we ran into were the permit and insurance costs. So I've spent some time talking with Christy up in the Highlands. They do a great job with their block parties and learning about successes and best practices and some of the challenges that they faced with that. So hopefully putting that together so we can help residents have block parties a little bit easier and encourage some community building. And so then I leave you with the neighborhood map that we created when we first began this program. I had people that represented each neighborhood in that room, and I asked the question of what makes Issaquah unique, and this is what they came up with. So that's been kind of something that's become part of the neighborhood program that I've brought along with us. So thank you for your time tonight.
Thank you, Listen. That was quite extensive. Who has any comments or questions at this point? Councilmember Hunt?
Thank you for the presentation. I did have a quick comment on the arts grants program, and I think you understand the issue, but I would just want to make sure that we are taking into account that some of the neighborhoods don't have the HOAs and they don't have that level of organization, and they're probably, because they don't have that organization, they're also the ones who might benefit from those grants particularly. So to have mechanisms that that are able to provide neighborhood arts grants, also, block parties, these different things that might otherwise be taken care of by the HOA to the neighborhoods that don't have the HOA is, I think, really important. And you did touch on that, but it came up so many times in your presentation, I just wanted to
Thank you.
emphasize it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? Lindsay?
So Lisa, first of all, thank you for the presentation. It's fantastic to hear about all of the different engagement at the different neighborhood level. I know with the website redesign, one of the things that I've heard is that the email notices by neighborhood, those lists are going to have to be reestablished. Is there a plan to reach out to individual neighborhoods like you did with the door hangers or signs in order to get that new set of engagement?
I think that's definitely something as we move through this website redesign process that the team's going to figure out. And once we get that part designed, certainly we're going to have that element of communicating out to the greater Issaquah area, kind of what they can, what's different on the website, how they are going to start seeing those news items. And so, yes, there would be some sort of communication with that.
Okay. And then I really like the new development signs and the communication in that way. I'd like to see further communication to individual neighborhoods from the city when we're doing work. And one example of a city that I think does that fairly well is Bellevue, where they're putting little signs, almost like candidate signs that are the little temporary signs in a neighborhood when they've done work in the area. And then it kind of shows, hey, the city cares about your neighborhood, this is what we've done, and also provides contact information in case they want to follow up. And so I'd like to see if that's something that we could do as well.
Thank you for that feedback.
Chris?
So I'm going to rewind you all the way back to the beginning, but you talked early on in resident feedback about leveraging neighborhood champions, and I was just curious who those were and how you leverage them and what that's, how effective that's been.
Yes. So I have a whole list of people and people that want to be involved and are more connected within their communities. So a lot of the time we send out different notifications to the neighborhood as a whole, but I'll also reach out to specific people just to let them know, like, this is information that we've sent out. Can you make sure that your neighbors know about it if they haven't seen it? I've learned that a lot of these neighborhood champions that we're calling them have their own lists that we don't have, or maybe they know how their community wants to receive information more than we do. So just using them to kind of help us give that message to maybe, if they're at a soccer game and they can mention to a couple of their neighbors that they typically don't see that aren't signed up for some of our updates, hey, by the way, this is going on. I just want to let you know. So using them in that capacity has been very helpful, and also, just arming them with information if something does come up, so they have if some things are going on in that neighborhood, so they'll be able to answer some questions.
And then kind of ongoing, you got feedback early on when you were forming the program. What feedback have you gotten on how it's working, and what kind of guidance, direction, course correcting have you?
Sure. So I think early on in the process, I got the feedback and the guidance to kind of close the loop is what I heard from council. So I'm here tonight doing that. So I think it's kind of, is that something that, you want to hear more of? Is it those types of things would be helpful to hear. But that is something I heard very loudly from council and clearly that they did want that close the loop. They wanted to know that. So again, that's why I'm here tonight as well.
I know we love it. What have you heard from the community in terms of feedback?
I've heard that specifically they appreciate having that information. They appreciate some of the extra steps, like those neighborhood champions reaching out to them. I just heard from a few board members down in the South Cove area that they appreciated some of the information that we've provided to them about some of the Northwest Sammamish Road improvements. I've also heard that the community is thankful that we're hearing them in a way to be able to communicate back to council, to staff about kind of what they're looking for as well.
And then last question, I promise. How can we, as the city council, A, support you in your mission, and B, kind of leverage what you're doing to also engage with the community?
It's a great question. I think, hearing from you, obviously councils, they change, council preferences change. So there's a couple ways that I try to get feedback to you through the online map that's updated, through presentations. Like I said, it comes back in many different ways. But hearing from you, like what, if that's working, if you want to see something different, knowing that would help as well. I also think leveraging, if you want to know more about the engagement, there's an email that we have sent, but if that's not, what the council would like to see, and there's a better way to do that, I'm happy to listen to that, certainly. And I also think, it is continuing to close that loop, sharing what I've heard, what we've heard, what staff's heard, and not only with me, but with all of staff coming back with the memos, the agenda bills, and things like that, because all of the feedback from the community comes back in a variety of ways.
Thank you.
Thank you. Stacy?
Thanks. Thanks, Lisa. I want to continue the close the loop sort of topic here. So I've heard a lot about closing the loop with the council. What about closing the loop with the community? So we have engagement opportunities and meetings. How do we close the loop with the folks who are engaging with us?
Great question. So we do have, the online map is also available for the public as well. I also think it's being diligent about following up with, we just did a memo for, our staff did a memo for the open house that happened for the SR 900 54th project. So closing that, but learning more what the community wants to hear about that feedback loop would be a good point. That's a good point.
It would, what I hear from people, not necessarily regarding this program, is that they want to know how their engagement and their feedback, how it's being used and how it made a difference. And, you all are in communication, so you know better, and you're connected to the community with your program, so, maybe it's something you can follow up on. But that's what I hear, that folks want to know how it made a difference. Is it worthwhile for us to communicate with the city, and then what the city's doing with that information. In terms of what I'd like to see more of is I see a lot of numbers and a lot of lists of what we do, and it all looks great, but sort of similar to what I said a minute ago, I'm interested in a little bit more hard information about the difference that we're making and what the community thinks about our program, and the opportunity to make course corrections, and that's about it. I just think I would, I don't know what all these numbers mean, and I see, there are numbers and then there are bigger numbers, but that doesn't always tell the story.
Right.
So I think the story behind the numbers, and if it's actually meaningful, what does it mean? That's what I'd like to know.
Okay. Thank you.
And Lisa, I think you have a wonderful job.
Me too.
Or at least I can tell you respond that way. You have a very unique opportunity that in our style of government and representative democracy, like especially here in Issaquah, where many people lots of the time are relatively satisfied with going on. It's when exceptions happen, or that they want to understand, they want to feel connected, they want to feel heard, and then more generally just being connected over time. It's clear that people interact with you, and you receive feedback where it should be input for those of us who do policy making, and maybe might guide us on some type of legislative action we need to take. At the same time, I know you're turning things around and going right to staff. It really doesn't have to come to council. It's right to staff, whether it be public works operations or parks or the communications team stream itself. So I do appreciate that very interesting and dynamic role that you have, and I really think, I don't often talk about pride of things that we've accomplished up here, but recently when we decided to make this a full-time position, I think that was good for the city of Issaquah and our residents, and I'm liking what I've seen in the execution. I'm not so concerned about empirical, very clear numbers that we can measure things. So much of the benefit of engagement is in very soft measures, right? And you can see that in just in those contacts that are made, the impressions that are made. That makes a difference. And yet, the work will never really be done. People change, impressions change, the needs change all the time. So it has to stay dynamic. I would ask that if there's some other tool that you feel is needed for this program, raise that issue. Let us know. Give us a chance to think about that. I think that would be very important. I encourage you to continue the good work. And I have a question.
Yes.
I want to role play a little bit. I'm a resident of South Cove. I want to know everything that's going to happen with the pinch point. I don't know anybody. I don't know staff. I don't know city council. I know the website. How am I going to stay connected? What would you tell them?
So they've come to me, and you're asking me that question.
Well, you pass them in the street, and they say, I'm new here. I want to know everything that's going on with the pinch point. How do I stay connected?
I would tell them that we have a webpage called issaquah.gov/South Cove that they need to put in their favorites and go to that for updates. And then we have a link, since it's WashDOT's project, that WashDOT would be the one that would be continually updating the neighborhood, but we would also be leveraging our relationship with WashDOT to make sure that information was getting passed along to the neighborhood. So I would start there, and I would give them my business card and say, if you have any more questions or anything comes up, please call me.
Okay, thank you for that. Now, I don't have your business card, so I wouldn't have the benefit of that. But I noticed, I'm just kind of curious, I noticed that you didn't mention, hey, go to our website, and there's this Notify Me page. And if you click on that, there's a lot of different things. And so I'm wondering, I'm going to use this example of the pinch point. I want to know everything that's happening there. If I go in here and I see there's is it going to be really easy for me to find which one I want to sign up for to make sure I achieve that? Oh, go ahead, please come to the microphone.
I'm itching now because it involves
Please
website.
introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Autumn Monahan. I'm the assistant to the city administrator and lead the city's communications program. So our Notify Me tool is in transition right now, and we have found that people are looking for information oftentimes by neighborhood. So if you are from South Cove and you're wanting information of items that are affecting you, it's been easier to combine that information by neighborhood than by type of project. It also gives us flexibility because projects change. So we found that, we signed people up for the Southeast 62nd Street project, and we had, I'm making this up, but 600 subscribers. And once that project's done, I'm losing all of those subscribers because I can't transfer them over to some other category. So we're finding that making them more organized by neighborhood is going to be helpful moving forward. And so we're starting that transition now. You'll see that with our website redesign, that it will have all of the neighborhoods and then a few other categories that are more citywide. But that list is going to get cleaned up very soon.
Well, thank you for that update. I know that unscheduled presentation was much appreciated. So I guess the South Cove area has a page, issaquah.gov/South Cove.
They do.
And I'll remember that next time as well. So thank you very much. Is there any other comments or questions, Lisa, before we wrap it up? Yes, Stacy?
Thank you I didn't know that we had neighborhood pages. And I see that there's like 5 of them. We don't have one for everybody. So I'm on Newport, and the active projects map link goes to an error, just by the way. That's it.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Well, thank you very much, Lisa, and I very much appreciate that presentation.
I think you have the public wants to speak.
Hello. Please. We have a member of the public here who would like to share her comments with the council this evening. on this topic?
I was afraid you weren't going to let me, and that was going to be so awkward. My name's Connie Marsh, and I live up on Squawk Mountain. And I wanted to tell you all that I think Lisa has been working very hard to try to do the community will. You will notice on that first page, she gathered the information of saying how the community would actually like to see their information. And that is what the community is asking for is rarely what is presented to the community in a meeting. So I have to laugh because at the last few committee meetings or open houses where we were all supposed to scurry off to our little individual areas and talk one-on-one, we had some grumpy cuss in the audience who refused to move so that we could have our sort of community cross conversations so that we could all hear what we were saying and absorb that and get together on a topic. And so I believe that those first things of what the community would like to see in meetings is spot on. I don't think that the community understands the toolkit or why certain formats are used for certain meetings and how that actually helps them provide good and timely information for things. It feels more like we're being divided and conquered. And so I would like to see if the community needs are being fulfilled. The neighborhood thing, that means I need to sign up for every single neighborhood notification in order to keep up with current projects, which in my brain is really awkward, but I look at the city more differently, I suppose. So I think you all would have to do the same thing. You'd have to sign up for every neighborhood to get the notifications of what's happening in each neighborhood to get ahead. So maybe there's a way around such things. But the main point was Lisa's doing her darndest out there in the community, talking to people as a human and absorbing the information. The structure around her, I don't think is so successful. Thank you.
Thank you, Connie. With that, we'll move on to our next agenda item. And I'm going to invite our Parks Director, Jeff Watling, to the microphone. This is ID 0278, establishing a park bench donation program. Now, each of our first two items this evening overran by 15 minutes. You have 30 minutes. So we're gonna do our best. I appreciate it.
Yes,
Jeff.
thank you. Good evening, Council. Jeff Watling, Parks and Recreation Director. I'll do everything I can to help get us somewhat back on schedule. So tonight, this topic, interested in sharing with you some of the work that we've been doing, exploring establishment of a bench donation program. We've certainly found as we began doing this research and establishing this program that I think there's multiple benefits that it would complete and accomplish and would address a variety of needs and interests that we've heard from our residents. Two that certainly come to mind that I would highlight is throughout our park strategic plan work, as we listened and heard to residents, we heard pretty clearly an interest in having more benches, more amenities in and throughout our parks and trails system. So a program like this would help us to accomplish that. Another need and interest that we heard and often hear on any given year is interest from families, residents in honoring a loved one, a family member, a colleague within our park system in some way. This can be a delicate and difficult thing to manage as we're trying to steward a public park system and all the uses and meet this goal. And we certainly feel that establishing a framework and some protocols like within this program could be very, very beneficial. As a number of cities around us have found, and we think benches and park benches are a really good place to start a program like this. So the policy question that we really have tonight and are teeing up is really fundamentally, do we want to establish this program? This is a program that in the end would be accepting donations. That's how these benches would come in. As you're familiar, per our financial policies, or adopted financial policies, those donations, acceptance of donations, require council approval. So we would be bringing this back to you seeking your authorization for the program in its entirety, as opposed to each individual bench. So real quickly, just how would this program work? What we would set out to do, and you'll see in the memo and the draft donation materials, the program materials, first step would be we would identify, we as staff, park planning staff, would identify locations within our system for benches. We feel a program like this needs to not only meet the goals and the intent of the donor, but we really want it to be incorporated and meet our broader public goals for amenities throughout our system. So we would identify those locations. We would communicate, work with our communications team, our neighborhood, Lisa and others in advertising and promoting this program. We would receive an application. We would work in that application. We would confirm a location with that applicant. We would then initiate the order and the installation process for that. As you see, we're identifying a price, a $3,000 fee that would cover the cost of the bench, the cost of labor to install, a concrete pad that we would put under the bench. From a maintenance standpoint, that makes it far easier to maintain the space. And one of the last steps would be also identifying wordage and verbiage for a plaque that would be placed on the bench, noting the donation. We really think, and I think as other cities have done, and as we really thought through this program, we feel a plaque of a smallish size, 2-inch by 5-inch plaque would really be able to balance that need, as that bench providing a public amenity in a public space, while at the same time very respectfully honoring the donation and honoring the intent of that donation. So in conclusion, I certainly invite your thoughts and feedback tonight, and that will certainly help us to shape up the final elements and the final details of this program prior to bringing this back before you later this fall for potential adoption.
Thank you, Jeff. I have two comments. First of all, I do very much appreciate the thoughtfulness of this program and the idea behind it. So I'm grateful for that. I think it has the potential to be very meaningful to people in ways that we can barely understand ourselves. There, in the memo, in the details area, you talked about the cost. It will become property is the second sub-bullet. This is on top of page 2 of the memo. And then the third bullet says, replacement of the bench or plaque due to theft or vandalism will be the responsibility of the donor. Now, it's something that we now own as the city. They made a donation. They have no real ownership stake going forward. And if for some reason beyond just the natural wear and tear, such as vandalism or theft, it's back on them to make whole. That didn't seem right to me. That doesn't seem right to me. So it's a comment for you to consider, because we own it.
Yeah.
It says it right there. Secondly, did you envision any opportunity for the donor to have a say in any type of design in what actually gets placed there? Because I think there'd be a natural expectation, especially if it's going to be made for such a meaningful reason.
So a design of the bench specifically?
Correct.
We would, actually, as part of this program, what we, as we've drafted it now, would recommend sticking with a standard city bench so that we do not have, just from a long-term maintenance and management standpoint, a wide variety of benches to try and maintain and sustain. So along with the location, we would also identify the bench standard, so there'd be some continuity throughout the system.
I can appreciate that. Thank you from a business perspective, but it's really hard for me to understand like there would be a real challenge in maintaining different designs of benches. So that's just my own reaction. So thank you. Who else might have any questions or comments? Leslie? Lindsay, excuse me.
I'll respond to Leslie too. Jeff, I really love this, and I think this could be something very much appreciated by our community. I'm wondering if we have looked at any legal issues if we were to deny an application due to the text that they have requested.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're certainly working with City Attorney's Office in finalizing this program. I think what we're trying to certainly recognize is there is a, to a degree, the city reserves some type of right to either say yes or no to this donation. If the motive for that donation is something that's maybe not consistent with what we want in a public space, but we'll want to be, treat that very carefully.
Thank you.
Stacy?
Thanks. I, first of all, completely understand Paul's question and the reason for Paul's question. And I think that if all things were equal, for example, materials, then if, for example, somebody wanted a more personally designed bench, but it was the same material of benches that we've approved, I'm not sure why that would be objectionable, and I'll just, leave you with that. I guess what I mean is I'm not opposed to the idea of more personalization. Of course, we would want limits on that. The cost, $3,000, so that tracks the actual cost. So I'm assuming that means it's going to have to go up over time, because the cost of benches and the cost of...
Yeah, we would review that. We would, within the program, we would need to build in some type of ability to review and ensure we're keeping up with actual costs.
Okay, and then we have in our code the ability to automatically raise some fees, I think, without it coming to the council, so I don't know if this would qualify.
Mm-hmm.
Then I think my last question or comment is, I love the idea, first of all, and I was surprised to learn some time ago that we really didn't have a formal program. So are benches the only opportunity here, or are there some other ways?
Great question. So like the little engine that could, yes, I think there is potential for expanding this. I think as we look at our capacity and wanting to do something well and kick it off right, we really feel we'd want to start with benches, and then as we build success in this, perhaps consider other amenities, be it drinking fountains, picnic tables, barbecue grills, other amenities. Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I wanted to reiterate the concern that Councilmember Winterstein brought up about the vandalism and having the donor pay for the vandalism. It just seems unfair. So I did have a concern about that. And then the other one I had just that gave me pause was about that cost might be higher than $3,000. So I just wondered if that could be clarified and if it could be a set rate, especially because it sounds like you would work with the donor to determine where it would be located, et cetera. So it seems like it should be $3,000, and then you can limit what places if it's too expensive a place or something like that.
Yeah.
It sounded strange to have it be 3,000, but it might be higher.
Yeah, I don't think that, as we look at locations and identify locations throughout the system, I don't think the cost will vary all that much based on location. But we'll certainly, I think, true up these costs, and as we bring this forward, make sure that is the proper price point that's going to cover our costs.
Okay, and just to clarify, what I'm talking about is on the bench donation program on the second or third question. It says, what is the donation amount required? And it says it's $3,000, but then it says additional cost fees may be incurred due to the site location installation requirements.
Okay. Good catch.
Go ahead, Chris.
So Jeff, thanks, great idea. Two questions for you. First one, have programs like this been implemented in other cities in the area, and what have we learned from their experience?
Yes, there are a number of our cities, and some of what we're building on borrows liberally from those public programs and learns from them. And I think we have learned, I think Bellevue has done this really well for a while. Kirkland has a program. They're initiating a program and focusing their program right now on their Cross Kirkland Trail, I think is the new name of their trail. It's going north-south through the city. So yes, cities have done it. I think what we've learned is some of these very delicate conversations we're having right here is how flexible do you want bench type to be? It is surprising, but it's really real. A different bench has different screw types, which have different mounting to concrete pads, which has different, it's just the variance does add a complexity when you start multiplying it out times multiple benches. So something we'll want to certainly balance and consider. And I think the other thing we've really learned from other cities is plaque and how to go about honoring that donation and really trying to balance again that this bench will be in a public space, but also a very special place for the person who's donating that bench.
I realize my second question is a comment, and it comes to the style of benches, and I think it would be good to have the option to have different styles, but have it be a finite pre-approved option. And part of it is to have some consistency of benches throughout the city so that we don't have things that are kind of out of place given the rest of the benches in the city. Yeah. So that's sort of my position on that one.
Okay.
Thank you. And I have one other comment, and then Stacy has another one as well. To the list of other potential improvements or amenities, everything you listed is hardscape. If you could think about natural landscape, such as a tree for a similar purpose, I think that would be offer a really nice other alternative.
So you had a couple of questions about the language in here about vandalism, and you didn't have a chance to respond to. I was wondering if you could explain why that language is in here.
Yeah, I think it's certainly something that we should go back and review, and I agree that it's not, the intent is not meant to be punitive, and I think we need to review how we word this and what the expectation is. As public property, there is a responsibility on our part. I think what we're also trying to balance is that reality that as perhaps a theft or vandalism occurs, what our capacity is at that moment in time, budget-wise, to be able to make that replacement may vary. So how,
Is the point,
what type of responsibility or what type of expectation do we want to put on ourselves?
okay, I get it. So it sounds like we're trying to not make a promise to people that if it gets stolen or significantly vandalized, that we don't have we're not making any promises. So maybe just the language can be a little different.
Yep.
That city's replacement of benches that are, stolen or significantly vandalized depends on, funds available, rather than
city budget
if you want it
statement,
replaced. It seems to me that the message just needs to be a little different.
Yeah, clearly.
But certainly anybody can step up and pay for the bench again, but I think just a different message.
No, it's great feedback by all of you. Thanks.
I think that's it. Jeff, we just bought 15 minutes back. Thank you so much. I really appreciate the presentation. Next, we're going to go on to the fourth agenda item for the evening. And I'm going to invite Tina Eggers, our city clerk, to the microphone. This is ID 0496, City Council Rules of Procedure. Welcome, Tina.
There we are. Thank you. Thanks for having me. I am here to report on the ad hoc committee's efforts. Let me put this in presentation mode. And regarding the rules of procedure. So a special thank you to our ad hoc members, Hunt, Ray, and Winterstein, for your work, which resulted in a refined and improved document. So thank you. The rules, something to keep in mind is that they simply reflect a point in time, that they're intended to be flexible, and they should be revisited over time to ensure that they remain relevant to our desired practices. So some of your touch points. You first identified this as a 2019 work plan last year. We kicked off the year at a workshop followed by a work session, and that was to better shape the rules. And at your May 20 regular meeting, you delegated further review to the ad hoc committee. Ad hoc committee met in the month of June. Their work is complete, and we're here this evening to discuss the items that are flagged for discussion by the committee, and to learn if there are any other areas of the rules that warrant discussion. Ultimately, on August 5th, we hope that there's adoption of these rules. So as I indicated, the committee completed its review. The document itself is ready for adoption. Have been edits made throughout for consistency and clarity. As mentioned in the agenda memo, this slide here lists the more notable modifications. So you'll see that council protocol regarding correspondence has been clarified. Council meetings now call it a new section for informational updates, and special business definition has been fine-tuned. Further, committee regional reports modified to reflect current practice, and there is clarity provided to the rules, clarity provided to accounts payables and payroll for the council's role. And a brand new section in there for our study sessions. Unless there's an objection, I'll plan on presenting the next few slides in a way that I'll introduce the item, ad hoc members can weigh in, and then council discussion and direction if it's warranted on those. Let's go back a slide. So this one, flagged for discussion, section 4.09, committee regional reports. What you see on the screen here is the actual proposed language in the rules. It captures current practice. For awareness, though, the IMC differs, and thought it was important that you recognize that that's the case. If council moves forward with what's on the left of the screen, then the IMC would be updated through an ordinance. What else was worth noting on here? And, I asked the ad hoc members if you wanted to weigh in further, to clarify or offer a differing view on committee reports.
What, Chris?
I'm going to do the minority report. As we worked through this document, we agreed on many, many things, and this is one of the ones where I think we were a bit split. And it was my feeling that the current committee report structure, where it should be very brief, giving the subject and dates, and just, to Joe Friday, just the facts, ma'am, was a more appropriate thing used for the committee report, and that if a more detailed discussion was required, the good of the order was a place to do it. My esteemed colleagues felt differently, but that was my position on that.
Excuse me.
I'll follow up that, and thank you for calling me esteemed. And I think you just used the word, if more discussion is required than another place, such as for the good of the order. And I agree with that. My thought about this proposal was that, as we were reminded from the community engagement presentation earlier tonight, that getting information out, and sometimes even in the form of a committee report, that as the current IMC reads, it may be sufficient at one level to just simply identify what was considered and the outcome, but I think if done in a succinct, purposeful, and effective way, a more detailed report is benefit. I hear them, I benefit. I assume then others as well. And that might be the only opportunity that we have or need to even take to help others, not just the mayor and the council members and staff, but also members of the community to understand what is happening at these meetings. So that was my thinking. But I do agree if there's more conversation that's needed, then we have another forum for that at good of the order. Lindsay.
Just a comment from my perspective, not having been on the ad hoc committee, is that I feel like the council committee, not the regional committee, report at the beginning is a useful way to present information to the public who may want to follow up on something. Given that we are looking at changing to a study session, I could see that being less useful if really the only information is going to be from ad hoc and regional. And so I could see keeping that concise or moving it to good of the order, since it's more internal conversation than publicly facing.
Vicki?
I'm not sure I understand, but part of why I think it's better to have, so firstly, in the ad hoc, I thought that the two are fairly similar. They both say that you should avoid duplicate reporting and make best efforts to be concise. So I didn't see them as all that different. But I do think it's important to talk about the ad hoc committee reporting out, because for the same reason I think that you were just talking about, but as we move to more study session, we will potentially have more ad hoc committees, which will likely not be on camera, and which we will want to share with each other and also share with the public what happened at those meetings. So instead of our committee meetings, if we are doing more work sessions and then more breakout of the ad hoc, I think there's particularly a need to have those reports out, which is part of why I think the proposed language is superior. It describes a bit more that process.
Can I offer just a point of clarification? That ad hoc committees in our structure that we're moving towards is more on the seldom, rarely used, identified at early on as part of your work plan, but certainly if council directs more of that, then it would increase the ad hoc frequency.
Yeah, I don't think we know yet what is going to happen with the loss of the committees, but to me it seems possible that we will have more discussions in ad hoc.
Before I go back to you, Chris, anybody who else hasn't, Stacy, no comment. Chris, go ahead.
So this is just a question, because it never occurred to me until this moment. Are we producing minutes from ad hoc meetings?
No. No, but we have documentation that shows our work from meeting to meeting, like it's similar in their last ad hoc that we just had.
I was just thinking, since we use the video often as enhanced minutes, because we can watch them on the recorded version, and we don't record the ad hoc, so it's just trying to think of the way that we can communicate what's happening in ad hoc to not only the rest of the council, but to the public too.
I think the rationale with council, if it's informative for the whole council, then that most likely the topic should stay with the full council. If it's a report out, an abbreviation of their recommendation, then that's sort of our differing perspective on that.
Any other feedback on this?
Nope.
So I think if I could ask everybody, if you don't feel like you've done it already, I thank you the way you framed this. We have IMC on the right, that's what it is right now. If we're going to change anything, we have to take formal action to do that. There is, I agree with Councilmember Hunt that at a certain level, they're not really that different. Especially because of that final sentence that's down there, avoid duplicate reporting and make best efforts to be concise. And I think that gets at the spirit, unless Robert's rules has something else, and that's why we have the IMC the way it is right now. But I think that, if I try on the regional committee I've been on for my 4th year now, some of these topics run for a couple of years, and they're complex. And hearing them a little bit more about them in a repeated manner, I think, honestly, it feels beneficial. I feel I benefit to it from having to report on it, but also I think that I feel like we owe that to our colleagues on the council, staff, and to the community. So that's, but I think this says reports and updates and make the best efforts to be concise. And I think that's in the spirit of what we're trying to do. So I was one of those esteemed colleagues who wanted the one on the left. Anybody else has a kind of a clear preference for unit to consider, please share it now.
Right, so at this point, we'd be asking, are we proceeding with what's proposed?
I
that the
prefer
majority?
to proceed with what's proposed.
Agreed.
We may not be unanimous, and we'll have another opportunity to consider it under formal legislation.
Sure. Can I ask Lindsay, or were you in that agreement? Uncertain?
I'm just thinking of the public and having it particularly at the very beginning of a meeting where they have to listen to each of those before the subject at hand. To me, from that preference, I think I would err more on the brief side, but I don't have a strong opinion, and I have valued the information that's come out, particularly about our local committees, so.
Thank you.
So I hear 3 out of the 5
I wasn't counting votes.
that are strongly in favor of what's on the left, and I'll proceed with that, and if council wants to provide other direction at August 5th.
Yeah, I would say that it's not a unanimous, but there seems to be a majority of consent to move forward with that. We will have another opportunity because we have to pass legislation to make a change. So we'll have another opportunity to discuss this further.
Okay. All right, moving on. There's 2 items that are flagged under Section 5 study sessions. The first is relates to chairing and facilitation. You have designated in the rules council president as the presiding officer. That's similar to your work sessions. And things to consider, of course, under Robert's rules is the chair is responsible for neutrality and to facilitate. So I look for feedback and clarification from the ad hoc committee.
I'll have a comment then, yeah.
Supposed to be last.
Well, I'm on the ad hoc committee. Go ahead, Vicki.
Okay, so this is about the study sessions in particular, correct?
This is only regards to the study sessions,
Okay.
correct?
So my recollection of our discussion at the ad hoc was that we started with a version in which the mayor would be the presiding officer, and the ad hoc's discussion focused around having this be a council-led meeting. And my main reason for wanting to have an option of a chair for specific topics would be to have something that gives a leadership role and a chairing role to other members of the council, similar to what we have right now in the committees. So right now we have committee chairs. We're going to be losing that, and this would give other council members an option to on a topic that they particularly are interested in or knowledgeable about, that they could lead the discussion, and they would have to do it in a neutral way. It's not super clear from this description, but the idea would be that you would have the presiding officer be the council president over the entire meeting, and then the president could work with individual council members that wanted to chair a topic, that they could then chair a topic, particularly if that topic is going to span multiple meetings, then you would have that continuity of a council member that would continue to chair, but they wouldn't be the presiding officer over the whole meeting. So that was the rationale. It would give that leadership.
I would add, in some of the conversation we had in the ad hoc, I think I was the one who stood up first about this, and I view these study sessions as an evolution of what we're doing now with our council committees. We're mashing them up, and that format of having a council member chair a council committee for the benefit of the council, I felt that we should retain. So the original proposed language did have the mayor as the presiding officer, and given that this is still a committee about formulating policy, I felt it was best that it remained, even the chair position remained with the council.
I think that we were all in agreement that this should be chaired by a member of the council. I think the interesting discussion is where Councilmember Hunt was going, is discussing, which is on an agenda, you can have the council president be the presiding officer of the council study session, but you could be in a situation where the president could designate a particular agenda item to be, the discussion to be led and chaired by a different member of the council. And I agree with the notion of providing those leadership opportunities to everybody on the council, particularly in areas in which they have both passion and expertise.
Stacy?
So on the face of it, to me, it sounds like a really good idea, and one of the reasons is because a leadership position can be very time-consuming, and so spreading the workload around, I think, has merit. But I'm not sure how we would arrive at, taking turns and talking about designating a council person for a particular topic, particularly if they have a passion or an interest around something. I'm struck by what it says up there, which is to be neutral, and voting last, and the chair should delegate the chairing responsibility if they want to vigorously debate, and the primary role of the chair is to facilitate. So that, to me, means that if somebody has a particular interest and passion in a topic, that particular person wouldn't be best to chair, because your role is different than if you're a member of the study session council of the whole. So I have some substantive concerns about that, and then I also have some process concerns about how we would choose. So it could be as simple as just what we do with leadership meetings. We just go down the calendar, and this study session, it's Paul, and the next one it's me, and then it's Chris, and on and on and on. It's just the luck of the draw, and people can switch around if they want. I think if we were going to look at the idea of sharing that responsibility, that's probably the way that I would want to do it. And because, and the other reason I would look at a systematic process for delegating is if it's left up to people to decide to do it, I'm not sure that you get I think it's a better way of spreading that work around if that's one of the reasons for doing it. And I see that as one of the reasons for doing it. Otherwise, it's going to be uneven. People are going to say, no, I don't want to do it. Anyway, those are my reasons. But I'm interested in it with certain parameters.
Thank you. Vicki?
I don't think that it is necessarily appropriate if you were particularly passionate that you would say you want to be the chair if you can't be neutral. I mean, I think that is a bad outcome. So I think I saw it more, and I didn't use the word passion in my description of it because I think it's more that it's something that you're interested in. So if I'm interested in things having to do with our watershed, and I'm on the regional committees that have to do with our watershed, for example, it's more that I'm interested in understanding that, and I might have some background in that, but it's not that I feel particularly strongly about a particular agenda bill that would be coming forward. I was thinking of it more as sort of topics that you might be more broadly interested in. I'm also open to a more lottery-based or some other sort of more randomized way of allocating the decisions. By topic seemed to make sense to me because that's closer to what our committees are, but I think that there is a concern about the neutrality, and I think the bottom line for me is that I think we do need to have opportunities for council members to be in a leadership role.
Agreed.
I'm conflicted about the neutrality piece because there certainly is, you have duties and responsibilities to facilitate a meeting. You want to make sure that everybody has equal opportunity to speak and that opposing viewpoints are given opportunities as well and that nobody can dominate. And I think that's a job that can be executed and to the spirit of what Robert's rules is attempting to. But to say, okay, but you have to stay neutral on the topic, and at the end of the day, you're going to be one of the voters, right? I mean, I'm just saying that's from the consideration on the right side, it talks about what Roberts recommends. And again, historically, from our council committees, we didn't do this. We didn't ask or expect a committee chair to be neutral on topics. They can have an opinion. They could have an opinion. In the end of the day, they're helping form and they're going to vote, and that's what they were elected to do. And so this is an area of Robert. I can see how a poorly executed or facilitated meeting could be detrimental to the purpose and what they're trying to do. But I also believe that people are capable of fulfilling that facilitator role and to achieve everything I mentioned earlier and still be a contributor to the discussion. Stacy?
So I agree that it doesn't say you can't be a contributor if you're leading the meeting. It says that my takeaway, and maybe I should read up more on Robert's rules, is that you shouldn't have a chair kind of driving discussion. It's the chair's responsibility to make sure, just exactly what you said, that everybody has an opportunity, that we have a fair conversation. And I think we have had some, in my experience, instances where that exactly the opposite happened. And this is the first time I've seen this. So now I understand why I was uncomfortable when that happened. But I agree with you. It's not a sitting back and not having any kind of an opinion at all. It's just that they have a responsibility that is in addition to being a council member.
Okay. So on that particular element of this, because I think there is the mechanics of who's the chair. We said, the ad hoc committee is what's in the document right now says it'll be a council member. Is there any thoughts in opposition to that, as opposed to like the original proposal was for the mayor? Is there any question among the council, of those of us here this evening, in opposition to that idea? And I've gotten visual contact from everybody here. So that concept, and so Of a council, well, no, just of it being a council, not the mayor, a council member, not the mayor.
Agreed.
So I think there seems to be unanimity there, but then there has been a very good conversation about how to, I've heard round robin, I've heard just a rotation schedule based upon topic. Chris.
Just a kind of a follow-up comment to my earlier one. What's important to me in the rotation is to create opportunities for every council member to have an opportunity to lead these sessions as we would have seen in a committee, kind of going on what you were saying, Paul, about it being an extension of our current committee processes. So the mechanics of how that happens, I'm pretty open to. I kind of like the idea actually of rotating it and giving everybody a chance to sit in the chair. And I was kind of glancing through Jurassic Parliament because it was just sitting here in front of me. And, you know, it with a small body, and this would be a small body, everybody has to participate, including the chair. So, I mean, sure, you have a role as facilitator, and you can be as impartial as you can be, but the reality of it is you're going to have a position, and the obligation is to not use your position as the chair and your position on an issue to dominate the discussion. So that's the goal we have to strive for.
Or shut down.
Thank you. Right, and maybe it's language like that we would want to add to our rules of procedure.
Yep.
For a specific guidance and what those duties and obligations, when you're in that role of chair of the study session, acknowledging that. Let's put it down, and then we can have something to enforce. I mean, someone could say, you know, Madam Chair, or Vicki.
So I was thinking more about my comment also about issues that cover multiple meetings, so longer-term issues, because I think we're going to be seeing more of those in work sessions. My understanding is work sessions will also be seeing issues before they're an agenda bill, and we'll be more involved in the process of the idea before it gets to the agenda bill. So we may see the same topic many times in a work session. And so the rotation actually, I think, might help with that also, because I was thinking if you're interested in that topic, you could chair all those meetings. But if you're rotating, then you would have the opportunity for multiple people who might have multiple perspectives, and it might lend itself more to that, having an overall neutral discussion. So I think that may, in retrospect, that may be another reason why it would be better to do rotation.
Lindsay?
So my perspective is very similar to Chris's, and my goal is to have leadership opportunities and to have a variety of people sharing the burden of chairing those meetings. But actually playing off of what Vicki was saying, I kind of like the idea of having a rotating, even as we focus on the same issue for multiple meetings, because then I would expect that chair to be able to summarize some of the discussion from a previous time. And so that gives different people opportunities to provide some of that summary perspective.
I appreciate that. And the thought that I had while listening to this, first of all, you're using the word chair, and I think I want to reserve the use of the word chair. That's a role, that's a presiding officer in a meeting, and that won't change during a meeting, I believe. I think the idea that you may be a subject matter expert and someone who has acknowledged interest, has more to share because of maybe just information, additional work, has a desire to be the facilitator for certain elements of that, like Lindsay just mentioned, to summarize what's been heard. I think that would be okay, right? And that doesn't have to be the presiding officer of that meeting. It wouldn't be difficult for me to imagine that Vicki has a real interest in this area. I may be facilitating, for example, but I might be generally interested in a different way in what your interest in that topic is. I think there's room for that there. I think that kind of agility is good in decision making. I think it's beneficial to what we're trying to do in making policy. And one last thing I would add, if we write down some of those things, the facilitator, the presiding officer, does not always have to have the last word on a topic.
Just looking at Robert's rule.
Yeah. Now, I'm going to try to summarize, and you can tell me if you heard the same thing. I'm just trying to help here. Then that, I think as far as your first bullet, council president designated as presiding officer, I think what's clear is a council member will be the presiding officer. Whether it always be, but the president or somebody else is where we've had a number of different ideas.
Right, so currently in the proposed rules, it's designated as the council president to facilitate and chair the duration of the meeting. If council would like to do something different and have it be part of September 1, then there would be a little work to do between then. If it's something you would want to revisit in January, or even in, 6 months from now, or whatever that right date is, that could also be an alternative.
I have a suggestion to maybe bridge us. I like what she just said. Maybe the way it's currently written, add or their designee. And then in 6 months, if we think that we have more clarity on a better way of establishing that, then we'll go back and readdress it.
I think that would be fine. I think we had also talked about differentiating the presiding officer and the chair, but that was also within the context of you might have multiple chairs on different topics, but you would have one presiding officer over the whole meeting. So I don't know, but I think writing it with that flexibility would be fine with me. If you want to say presiding officer, council president, or designee. Works.
Chris?
I think I can get behind the designee, and I think when we've said this several times, we're just figuring this out. So let's put something together, let's move forward with it, and then let's recognize that as we get further down the road, if it's awkward or if it's not working, we can change it. But let's get something down so we can move forward and try this out.
Any other comments? Stacy?
So I'm not sure I understand. Is the language going to prescribe that we're going to have rotating, or are we just giving the option, but later on?
I hear it's adding some flexibility. So it would say council president designated as presiding officer or designee, and that you would be revisiting this item to flush out what those details will be at a later date.
Yeah, I see part of that as kicking the can down the road, and we're going to have, I don't really like that, but if I'm the only one, then it doesn't matter.
There's a couple hands going up. If I may add real quickly, council president could decide, could have the latitude, say, okay, I'm going to institute a rotating schedule.
I like that. So what I see as a problem is, that January, we're going to have a new council. It's going to be an entirely new discussion. So I think if we're going to make decisions about how things are going to happen with this new structure, if we want things to start off with this in mind, then I think we need to do it and not wait until January till we have new folks. And it's just going to be, every time we talk about rules with a different council makeup, it's a whole new discussion. So it would kind of be nice to get some practice under our belt too here with the rest of the year anyway. And I know that means you had to put together
another
some other
layer.
language.
It is another layer of complexity for implementation, but we could probably offer some recommendations. You do have the option of just keeping it as is for 3 months, 4 months, without adding the word designee to it, and revisiting it in 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, whatever that right date is to actually develop that part. So that was another way of sort of taking out the just keep council president as the chairing for the whole meeting. You could do that.
I don't know, I just like the whole expectations. I mean, you come in January, I don't want it to be like, okay, let's have a conversation about how we want this to work. I just think that's just, we're just asking for a problem. And, I mean, I don't know, I don't think the language has to be difficult. And yes, I think we can leave it up to council leadership or the council president to work on a rotation schedule with the clerk's office. I don't know that it has to be any more difficult than that. But that's my preference. Let's do it. Let's just do it all. Let's just do it right the first time, the way we want it, rather than kicking the can down the road. But
Stacy, I want to make sure I understand you. So how would you say that in our rules of procedure?
it would be, so this one, council president or what, designee is the presiding officer, and the language would be added that the council president, when determining who the designee will be for study sessions, will work with the clerk's office to come up with a schedule with rotating council members or something like that. I don't.
Thank you, Lindsay.
So we actually have similar language in 3.06 when talking about leadership meetings. It just says a rotating third council member will also be invited to attend. I figure we could use something like that in the case of presiding officer here. 3.06 is the leadership meetings. So I think we fairly clearly, from my perspective, I heard that we wanted to have a rotation from the group here. So from my perspective, I would say if we're going to stick with one thing, rather than having it be a council president, I would have it be a rotating member.
So neutral rotating?
Mm-hmm.
Currently,
Neutral rotate?
Like just
currently,
alpha sorted? I mean,
Yeah.
is it?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it doesn't specify in 3.06, so I don't think we would need to specify.
And we can always say, oh, that's really one that I want to do. I really wanted to do it. I'm going to be on vacation. Can we switch? I mean, we can always switch and.
so the current language in the proposed rules of procedure, it's 501 study sessions, subparagraph A, presiding officer. The council president shall preside at study sessions, period. In the absence of the president, it'll be the deputy. In the absence of the both of them, it'll be the first one who can be contacted.
I trust Tina to revise based on our conversation.
And you know, Stacy, you're, I'm,
If we agree to do that.
yeah, I don't object with your, when my proposal for, or their designee was, I was trying to give a little bit more latitude, but the spirit was the same, was that let's find a way to share the work. And if a regular rotation with a schedule or some other means, I just wanted to give the latitude to do that. So I think I think in essence, we're trying to achieve the same thing. And I'm seeing a couple nods of the head, Chris and Vicky as well. Tina. Section 501, paragraph A, presiding officer. We've used a lot of words up here this evening. Do you have any questions or clarity that you need from us to make another revision?
Not at this time. I think, we'll write it so it's hopefully simple, hopefully provides some flexibility, but is as clear. So I can share that language with the ad hoc committee. Would that be helpful?
It's exactly what I was going to ask. Yeah, thank you.
Okay. All right.
I got thumbs up from Vicky, so, oh, Christie.
Yep.
So yes, they all just, everybody just, those
Okay.
two committed to respond instantaneously when you
I'm going to
said that.
move on to another slide.
Go on, please.
Okay.
Yay.
All right. May or may not be an easy question, but the question is, We initially offered the second and fourth Monday of the month for study sessions, and in taking a closer look at that option, we realized a Tuesday could be a consideration and wanted to offer that as a new meeting date. There are some things you might consider. You may agree or not agree, but it could allow for an additional day for your council review, additional day to post questions. It allows internally an additional day for meeting prep. Does not displace or conflict with any other recorded meetings. And Tuesday is a day that is familiar with committee of the whole meetings, so not all that unusual. Monday considerations, as I said, it could lessen your review time. I don't know how real this is, but there could be a potential for absences if there's a 3-day travel or 3-day planning that extended through a Monday. It does display some conflict with both the Park Board and the Transportation Advisory Board. So that would so those are committees with members who are used to meeting on those dates and times. They would either one committee, or excuse me, board or commission would need to move to a different date, or both would if it was a concern that there would be a conflict between council and another commission, a televised commission meeting at that time. And then, of course, you already use Monday for your work sessions, so it's not all that unusual.
I'm going to be so bold as to claim that this topic isn't as complex as the last one. Your thoughts, Stacy?
I don't feel strongly one way or the other. The only thing about Tuesdays when you get into the summer is it's concerts on the green. So,
Hear it tonight.
yeah. So, are we, with study sessions, no longer having committee of the whole meetings?
Correct. You'll have more information on council meetings and through other formats. Correct.
Other comments? Chris?
I don't care.
Chris doesn't care. Other comments? Lindsay?
From my perspective as a parent, it makes my life easier if everything is on the same day so that I schedule all my kids' activities on the other days. That being said, I hadn't known about the other considerations, and so I would prefer to not displace two boards just to have that be on the same day. So given that extra information, I would prefer Tuesday.
Okay. You're going to say something, Stacy?
Does it displace Park Board and TAB from this room?
Yes.
Anything, Vicki?
I do not feel strongly. I have a slight preference for Tuesday because it gives me more time.
My 2 cents is I did not have a preference, and then I started a new job on July 1, and standing conflict on Monday nights for the second Tuesday. Okay, or excuse me, the second Monday. So if we moved them to Tuesday, I thought, okay, move it to Tuesday. I told them not to change the company meeting just because I couldn't make it until, what's that? For the rest of the year.
Yeah.
So I go, so
We need to remain neutral. I'm just teasing.
I'm glad.
Let's do Tuesdays.
More time, some flexibility, doesn't displace, does conflict with concerts on the green. It will at least maybe 4 times. Yes.
Tina, I know you had asked for feedback from us. Did we hear any strong opinions or unavailability from the other 2 who are not here?
I did not hear from one of those 2, and the other one said, I'm fine either way.
All right, so I think we're leaning toward mixing it up and making it a Tuesday.
I'm liking the Monday.
So we're not unanimous. This is just a rule, so there's no.
No, this would be an ordinance. So as we come back on August 5th, we would ensure that the rules and the ordinance document were in alignment. That's all.
So we're not unanimous on this either, but there is.
Right. But we can
general
flag it.
consensus. Yeah, we have. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Okay. Is there any other section or item under a section that there is not consensus as part of the rules? I had sent out a email to the group asking if you had any concerns, questions, items that you considered flagged to alert me. I haven't received any feedback, but certainly wanted to pause and say, now would be the time to tell us so that we can prepare for August 5th.
Not seeing any.
Okay. This image you have seen previous. I wanted to give you a snapshot of the study session transition timeline. It reflects the work that we've been doing throughout the year to pivot. It did identify some development and training. When we move to ad hoc, you'll see that the development and training is shifted slightly, but we're still on track for adoption and go live. Next steps for that at August 5th would be regular business. We'll be asking for adoption of the rules. We'll also be asking for an ordinance. We will share and inform on the development and training. And then looking further ahead, of course, there's further enhancements, particularly with the unveiling of our website. We will continue to review, monitor, and adjust. And of course, we'll be checking back with you next summer. And I received direction from you, so thank you.
Okay, thank you. And personally, I want to thank you, Tina.
And Tisha.
Tisha, of course. Andrea as well. Thank you for the work you've put into this. I know we went a little bit longer, took a little bit longer than we had planned for, so thanks for your flexibility. Thanks to Vicki and Chris as well. And something tells me we have a member of the public who would like to address the council.
Yes.
Vicki?
I'm not the member of the public, but I did want to just bring up that I thought we had also, in the ad hoc, wanted to review the reasons we were going to the study session and make sure that we were clear that why we were transitioning from the committees to the study session format.
Yeah, that sounds familiar. I'd forgotten about that.
To what audience? As part of the rules, as part of?
That was, yes, because that was my understanding anyway. In our committee meeting, we had discussed that we wanted to review that because it seemed like it fit into the broader discussion about the way we work.
The ordinance will capture some whereases, some history that'll be spelled out in the agenda bill. We will certainly inform you on the study session transition on August 5th. This time could have been used for study session transition, but we had more work to do on the rules to make sure that we were at a point that we could proceed.
I think I heard that the ordinance itself will capture in the whereas clauses the justification for study sessions.
It's not elaborate, but there is some.
And perhaps, Vicki, that will, well, at this point, we don't have anything else prepared to go over right now. That would afford us the opportunity to discuss that. Chris?
So what I think would be helpful is when we bring this forward for adoption on the 5th, if we could establish and document what the goals were we've set out to accomplish, I think it would be very helpful then next summer when we go back to say, did we accomplish those goals, and we do the check-in. It'll provide us a good baseline of this is what we set out to do, and then we can say, did we accomplish that? Did we over-accomplish, what have you? So if we could have those kind of spelled out on the 5th, that would be very helpful to me.
So like part of the staff presentation.
Exactly.
Yeah, that would meet my goal also. I just want to review that because we were presented with a few reasons why we were moving to the study session, and I think we should keep those in mind as we transition and see how it's working and assess our progress. And it was something that came up in our
Okay, thanks for reminding us. Any other comments from the dais? No, before we move on, any member of the public here that we don't normally do this, but we'll make tonight, please share with us your comments.
The only one. It doesn't take that. Connie Marsh again. I live up on Squawk. And I'm here to tell you the public doesn't know that's happening. And for the last 30 years, it's all been the same way, basically. And meeting tonight told the public basically nothing about actually how it was going to work for them. And I remember standing up and asking for some sort of education for the public. So, because this is going to create even more confusion than the system that we have. And I didn't see or hear anything about that. So it feels more like this is against that communication thing that we just had earlier tonight, clear and consistent and easy and informed. So I would start now saying, could you put a push out to all the neighborhoods and understand that our meetings are changing, and this is how they're going to work, and these are the nights they're going to be, and this is how you're going to be able to track them. And then ad hoc meetings are, they make me crazy because I can see nothing, and then they come out with virtually no information. They come out with a conclusion, and something that comes out with a conclusion is void of public input. And that's how the ad hoc committees come out in this town so far. If that is changing, then but I don't expect it to. So I am adamantly opposed to anything other than the most minor ad hoc committees because they're invisible with no notes. And basically, 3 people on the council are deciding or coming to consensus on something, and that almost never, ever gets overturned in a public venue, and that's inappropriate. So I'm not really adverse to the transition. I just think that the public needs to be core in the transition and the reasons why, and brought along in baby steps. So I can imagine 80,000 cool ways to do that, even fun ways that might make more people understand the process, but I think you have to start it like yesterday. Thank you.
Thank you, Connie. Okay, now we're going to move on to our last agenda item. Thank you to the staff for remaining patiently for your time at the podium. This is ID 0495, the regional agenda. It's being presented by Andrea Snyder and with some support, I imagine, as well. Andrea, welcome. And Tisha and Tina, good evening. Thank you.
I thought you were going to kick us off.
I'll kick it.
Good evening, and thank you very much. My name is Andrea Snyder. I'm the Deputy City Administrator, and with me is Jean Paul, our Management Analyst. Jean is going to provide a little bit of background for you today on the regional agenda and what our previous efforts have been like regarding the regional agenda. And then we're going to seek feedback from the council on certain questions that we have regarding where we move next as a city for the regional agenda in the future. So with that, I'm going to let Jean take it away.
Thank you. Welcome, Jean.
Good evening. I'm Gene Paul, Management Analyst in the Executive Office. I'll be presenting some background information for your regional agenda discussion this evening. Some of you helped create previous versions, but I'd like to begin by answering the question, what is a regional agenda? So that all of you have a common understanding for this discussion. A regional agenda is ultimately a tool for your use. you are the primary audience of this document, and the goal is to provide clarity and guidance on regional issues. The intent in producing a regional agenda is not to create new policy, but to consolidate and summarize existing policy. The comprehensive plan and strategic plan are examples of existing council-approved policies that already have regional components. The regional agenda is also separate from the state legislative agenda. The audience for the legislative agenda is the state legislature and our lobbyist. Additionally, our lobbyist may work with regional entities, but is largely focused on issues at the state level. While the two agenda documents are coordinated so that regional efforts can complement our interests at the state level, they still remain separate documents. There are a number of reasons for having a regional agenda. Many of these reasons were identified when the concept of a regional agenda was first proposed in 2015. Besides having a history of serving on regional boards and committees, the council has acknowledged that critical decisions concerning funding or services happen at the regional level. Transportation, land use, and human services are just a few examples of policy areas with regional decisions that impact the city. While previous councils have acknowledged the need to participate at the regional level, they also recognized that engagement could be improved. By creating a regional agenda, those councils planned out how to focus finite time and council resources while also enabling members to speak with a consistent voice in the region. As I just mentioned, the need for a regional agenda was first identified in 2015 and formally proposed during the council's annual goal-setting process as an objective for 2016. The first version of the regional agenda was brought to council in March 2016. That first version evolved over the course of 3 council work sessions. Although it began as a separate policy document and a spreadsheet with all of the regional boards and committees, the final version merged these ideas into one document. That final version is part of your packet for this evening's meeting. Because the council committed to adopting a regional agenda, an annual regional agenda, in the 2016 version, the next regional agenda was presented to council in March 2017. The 2017 process was significant for 2 reasons. First, the council more clearly defined how assignments to regional committees would be handled. Second, the council decided to refer the different sections of the agenda to relevant council committees. This decentralized process allowed a more thorough review, but it also took longer because of less frequent committee meetings and dense meeting agendas. The regional agenda did not return to the full council until October. At that point, the administration recommended that the council accept the agenda because of the timing, and also recommended that work on the 2018 agenda would begin the following January. However, because of personnel changes and council priorities, the regional agenda was not addressed in 2018. Compared to other cities in the region, Issaquah is fairly unique in laying out a specific regional agenda. Only Redmond and Renton have documents that identify policy areas and goals in a similar way. Both of these efforts were also limited in that they were only adopted once by each city, with Redmond in 2016 and Renton in 2017. However, it's also important to note that a lack of a formal regional agenda does not mean that other councils fail to think about regional issues or attend regional meetings. Almost every council takes the time to set goals, create a work plan, or formally assign meetings to regional committees. Formally assign members to regional committees. It's just not common for a city to assemble all of the policy directions for regional efforts into one place. Before beginning the discussion around policy questions contained in the memo, I wanted to show you the tentative schedule for the next steps. At meeting number 2 in September, we will follow up on the feedback we hear tonight and also present potential agenda templates. At meeting number 3 in October, we plan on presenting the first draft of the regional agenda for your feedback. Ultimately, we plan to present a final draft in November for your adoption. Before I hand it back over to the Deputy City Administrator, are there any questions on background that I can answer?
Not seeing any.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Jean. And so that leads us to our first question for your consideration today, which is, does the council see value in developing a new regional agenda? And depending on the answer to that question, we can move on for others.
Stacy,
Yes.
any other comments?
Yes.
Okay.
And I'm going to +1 Stacy's.
Okay, thank you. So with that, we will move on.
And let me, before you move on, Jean did a great job of summarizing that. And I remember during the formation, there's a clear recognition that there were other, and I think you've said this, there were other bodies and boards and commissions around here that were making very important decisions. And it was very important that we collectively pulled those, understood who are those other organizations. We did, but we just didn't have it pulled together any in one place. And I think it's very, we get things done at the state level by having an agenda, and we have somebody driving that. Well, we are the representatives at this regional level, so that same level of coordination. Yes, I understand it's unusual and not common, but I think without a coordinated effort, then the chances are reduced of us succeeding at the regional level. And I mean, I do appreciate your point. A lack of an agenda doesn't mean you don't have a regional effort, of course. But I think there's a lot of value to having some structure and a deliberate effort to say, these are the organizations at the regional level doing important work affecting us. Let's make sure that we're not going to miss these opportunities to lend our voice.
Okay, thank you. On that note, if we want to proceed with a new regional agenda, that's the goal of the question so far. I'm sorry, for the rest of the evening is to make sure that in whatever form it comes next, that it meets the council wishes for what that tool looks like and how best it can serve you. So next question for you is, how has the council used the regional agenda? Again, knowing that what we're hoping to get out of the discussion tonight is helping us shape the tool and make sure it's the most useful to you. So if you could discuss those who have used it, how have you used it? In what ways have you found it to be helpful?
Stacy?
I have a short answer, and my answer is that I have not used it.
Lindsay, then Vicki.
I also have a short answer in that I did not know it existed.
Vicki?
So I think it's useful for two main things. So one is, I think it's useful to see how the regional, just across the different years that it has been used, and even between the years that are in our packet, how things have changed, because I think that's always really interesting. So what actions were we, taking in 2016 for a given point, and then sometimes it seems like different objectives changed, or they changed, they separated into two objectives where they were one objective. So I think it's useful for that issue tracking, and I also think it's useful for when new council members join the council. I think it's useful to see the council's position on a wide range of regional issues. So it's useful for that continuity as well, because a lot of these things, like the urban growth boundary, these are topics that will span probably multiple versions of our city council. We'll still be talking about the urban growth boundary when we have different council members on our council. So I think it's useful for those two things, and I have used it just in terms of understanding our perspective on some of the issues in the region for my regional appointments.
Okay.
I do have a comment, and I really view the one that we did in 2016 as really the only one that really acted upon, and I can say for certain that as a member of a regional committee, that knowing that the council had taken formal actions and position, when you go out and represent the city's position, and I should have said this earlier, part of the motivation of even having one of those, if you go to, anybody's had the opportunity to participate in one of the Sound City Association's public issues committees. What's really clear, and it could be in other committees as well, when a representative from another jurisdiction said, my council has talked about this and our position is X, it's very clear that that is a very powerful voice at a meeting. And I'm sure maybe you felt that already if you in your other regional participation in your committees. And that was a real key objective to that. And so, like you said, we didn't do one for 2019. We didn't do one for 2018. The 2017 one was came kind of late, and so I really appreciate the fact that this has been resurrected. So I think the question in itself, how have you used that? There's a little bit of a detriment because there was one that we truly acted upon, and I can say that I knew that going into my work on a regional committee that with this voice as needed, this I could speak with a little bit more authority, and I think a little bit more influence, being able to say this is our council has taken this position, and that's how I think it's very useful as well.
Okay, thank you. Next question. The next series of questions really get at this idea of what is your goal for the regional agenda, or what would you like to accomplish with this tool? So kind of sub-question that helps us answer that overarching one is, should the process examine representation on boards and committees, or will 2020 be the same as today? So that means, should we be looking at identifying gaps of representation and areas where representation is no longer a priority? Or is the expectation that the regional representation, like I said, will be about the same as what it is today?
I'm sorry, Lindsay, then Chris.
So looking over the other regional agendas that you had provided, I really found it very interesting. I appreciated having a list of the partners and committees that approach a subject. And so I think that's valuable when it comes to having an agenda. I think a second step and consideration for the council and the city is which of those boards and committees are valuable and which do we have a desire to have a representation on. And I don't think that necessarily needs to be in an agenda, but it does need to be a discussion that we have.
All right, thank you, Chris.
So I think this is an interesting question, and I think the answer is yes, we need to re-examine what boards or committees we want representation on. But I think this is the tail, not the dog. I think we need to define what our priorities are first on the regional agenda, and then superimpose where do we get the most impact in terms of boards and committees in terms of moving those priorities forward.
Stacey?
Yeah, I would plus one to Chris's comments, and I actually, I feel very strongly that we should be strategically placing ourselves where we need to be. And I think for what our practice has been is that we have a list and we kind of volunteer for what we want to do, and I think for good reason, because it's a job up here that takes a lot of time, and so to the extent that you can serve on a board or a commission that is of interest to you, I think that's valuable. But I think the bigger value is what it means to our community, and we need to be doing things that are in the best interest of our community. And so I don't think that the primary factor at all has to do with what our interests are. I think the primary factor is where we will best serve the community, how we will best serve the community, and in what spots should we be in to be strategic about that in the region.
I'd like to make a comment. I agree with Chris and Stacy. Thank you for that. And I'll go one step further, that we will not always get representation on a regional board or commission that might align or be principal to an important policy position that we have. That does not mean, however, that we no longer pursue that issue through that board or commission. And so I think that it should be priorities. It should be driven. It should be policy driven. And some of these boards and commissions, we have automatic seats on them. Those are actually outlined in our rules of procedure that we talked about earlier. Some of them we just have to we have to apply for, and we may or may not get accepted. All of those that go through SCA are that way, for example. But that's another purpose, I think, of this document, is that, yeah, we know who, if we get representation there, great, but if not, we still have to maybe monitor, and just like we monitor things at the state level, here are the issues coming through, here's our position on this, what are we doing to make sure we get the outcome for Issaquah? If we have a representative on there, great. If we don't, we still need to work it.
So just to reiterate, what I'm hearing from you is it seems to be that there's some consensus around, yes, through this regional agenda formation process, we should examine what regional committees and boards we have representation on, but first we need to, we should be doing that strategically, and so first we need to set some of those priority areas.
I think that's well said.
Great. Okay, thank you. Okay, next question. Should this document address the role of council members on regional boards and committees? For example, if a council member sits on a regional board as a result of an appointment from the SCA, is that member ultimately representing the city or SCA's viewpoint? So should we examine the role through this process and document that in the regional agenda?
Stacey?
I'm going to say no, because the document also already has a tendency to be lengthy, and I think we need to understand, the administration needs to understand what our role is. I'm not sure that we need to go into that much detail in the regional agenda.
Okay.
Vicki?
I agree. I think that it's helpful to have the regional agenda be the objectives of the city, and then the information that's in the regional agenda, I think, is helpfully laid out. But I think once you get into city or SCA viewpoints, an SCA appointed seat, for example, it can get pretty complicated. So I say that as a person that has a SCA appointed seat. I think that could get into a lot of context and wouldn't really meet the goal. Like, going into that context and trying to explain all of that wouldn't really meet the goal of what I see as the goal of the regional agenda, which is to explain the city's objectives and then what we're doing to meet them.
I'll add, I think our rules of procedure actually begin to address this. And I think SCA, I don't know if we don't have many other options, but that organization, when you are appointed to one of their boards or commissions, you are part of a caucus. So usually not alone. There's probably other SCA representation on there, and with other representatives from other municipalities or other entities there as well. And part of your charge of being an SCA representative is that you're working, on behalf of the entire that organization. And I think our rules of procedure kind of state that if there's an individual preference, but if you're a city council member and there's a city has a policy adopted on a position on a policy, then you should be representing that. And as our rules and procedures say, if you want to represent your own personal opinion, you're supposed to express that. And SCA has something similar as well. And so I think there is, it may be in the rules of procedure where something like that might need to be clarified. But I think SCA in itself is a unique set of circumstances. I can't think of any others that put that same requirement upon us. Anybody else before we go on? Okay. Thank you, Andrea.
Okay, thank you. So I'm hearing no, we shouldn't examine that through this process. Okay, next. should the goal areas, so this is getting back to council's earlier comments on how to be strategic and what to focus on through the regional agenda. So should the goal areas be the same as identified in previous versions, or should the goal areas be aligned with the newly adopted strategic plan? And as reference, we can take a look at the next slide, which outlines some of the similarities and the differences between the previous regional agenda goal areas and the strategic plan.
Okay, thank you. Chris?
I'm going to say both. I like the regional goal areas that we've identified before. They're very discrete and they're very aligned to kind of regional issues. That being said, they should also align to our strategic plan. I think if we're putting together our goals in the regional areas, they should very much align to the strategic plan. And as you kind of laid them out here, there's some overlap anyway. But I think each and every one of the regional goal areas, we have strategies that we can align to the regional agenda.
Any other comments? Vicki?
I guess I don't see the benefit of reorganizing into our strategic plan necessarily. I think that you could go through that exercise and you could move all of the transportation regional goal areas into a mobility bucket, for example. It seems to me like the regional goal areas might not be a one-to-one with our strategic priority areas, and that's okay. So I'm fine with it.
Can I clarify something?
I'm going to give others an opportunity to speak first. If Lindsay or Stacy have a comment. Lindsay.
I think public safety and schools should definitely be on there as far as regional goal areas and wanting a representation, even though those aren't on the strategic priority areas. So those would be my caveats if we moved toward the strategic priority.
I'm going to take my opportunity to speak first as well. Spot on. That's exactly what I was going to point out. I can really appreciate, I think I know what you're trying to do, and I understand not wanting, or I can understand wanting to have alignment and clarity. And I think this is a fair question to ask. And my first thought about this was very deliberately the strategic plan does not address certain kind of day-to-day critical operations that are just going to go on anyway. And so we may not have sections, and I think Lindsay pointed that out, such as public safety, for example. And so I think in a way, these goal areas complement the strategic plan. I think the strategic plan, where there is alignment with these goal areas, give certain, they illuminate the most critical issues or maybe policy positions that we would want to take. But I think if from here you're trying to answer the question, how do I map them together? I would. It seems to me that if one approach might be to, stay with the regional goal areas as a place to start, and as you develop out the proposal template for, I think you're going to show us in a couple months, I think mapping those positions and those issues out to our strategic plan would be very valuable. Those are my comments. Chris wanted a second comment.
I just wanted to clarify because in listening to the other comments, I realized I read the word align differently than I think others did. In terms of align as in to map, as in to correlate and to arrange, that seems like a useless effort. My use of the word align was, are we bringing the concepts and ideas that we identified in the strategic plan and bringing those over into the regional agenda and that kind of alignment? So not a structural alignment, but a conceptual alignment. That's where I was going. So when Vicki was talking and she was like, "What are you talking about, Chris? You're crazy." It was because I was thinking of the word differently.
Okay.
I didn't have that thought at all. Thanks for the clarification. Any other comments? Andrea, any questions that do you have for us? or comments, or maybe some other insights you want us to consider.
So I just want to make sure that I heard you correctly. So what I heard is that more or less keep the same goal areas, but perhaps there's a way to show, I think actually Councilmember Winterstein, you used the word mapping to the strategic plan and make note of where that overlap exists. Is that what I heard?
And you did.
Okay.
And my intention was to use it in how Chris defined his use of the word alignment. Thank you, Vicki.
So one more thought is that in our strategic plan, we do have specific things that we know will require regional coordination and regional effort that are objectives that we have for our city, but require more of a regional approach. So I think where we can make sure that our regional goal areas or our regional objectives are reflecting the same points as in our strategic plan for those particular topics, that is, I think, a worthwhile exercise, because that's what we went through the process of working with the community to identify the most recent set of strategic priorities, and some of those have a strong regional component.
Thank you.
Okay. So I'm hearing our new regional agenda should have some sort of a hybrid approach when talking about the goal areas. And that's something that we can bring back to you when we are looking at the proposed template and see if that reflects what you would like.
Thank you, Andrea.
Okay. Okay, so what else do you want from this tool? What is missing from previous versions, or how might the tool improve?
Stacy?
I don't know if, I'm not going to answer each one of those exactly, but I did see that the Redmond and Renton's are very similar, at least in structure. And I kind of liked them. I thought we had just kind of two, I don't know. I liked the way that those were structured. I don't know that we had anything missing from our previous versions. I think we had information that we didn't need, like specifically who was representing us regionally. We didn't know which person in the administration or the council. I don't think we need that. And how might the tool improve? I think it's fairly simple, and I thought the two that you put in here as samples were pretty good.
I have some comments. The format of what we put together turned out to be awkward. There was an intention originally that there would be some type of horizontal alignment between an action and a status, and that table format that wasn't working. And I think that some of the artifacts of the usability may have been compromised because of that. So I agree that there may be a better layout. And one thing I would point out as well, each of these areas like schools and human services and public sector, public safety, they all have a goal statement with each of those. And I don't know if you were going to get to that in any of your questions here tonight, but as we move forward, obviously, I think there'd be some value to take a close look at those again, because there was a lot of shaping of those goals as written for the original in the 2016 version, and they do, I think, merit another review. Lindsay.
So looking over the Redmond and the Renton, excuse me, the things that I appreciate there are the council direction sections that list other policies, that the policies and plans that the council has previously adopted, which is really great for somebody when they're coming on and going, what contextual information do I need? So I think that's great, along with the summary of adopted policy or kind of policy direction, which I think is missing from what our plan was, which was kind of like, these are the actions that we would like to take. Maybe there's a goal, but not a sense of the policy direction from that. And so I view these other plans as more information providing to the person using it rather than focusing exclusively on the action desired. And so I would like to see a little bit more of that information provision.
No other comments on that one? Okay, back to you.
Okay, thank you. And that leads us to really the final question, kind of dovetails nicely from Councilmember Walsh's comments. So what level of detail is desired in the regional agenda? Are we talking keeping it at a strategic guidance level, which is I think what you saw more in the 2016 version, or something that is more detailed, almost down to the talking point level, or trying to anticipate those, which 2017, definitely some parts of the 2017 regional agenda, you see it become a lot more detailed. So is there a preference among council in terms of level of detail that's included?
Chris?
I would prefer we stay at the strategic guidance level. It provides more directional information for us. I think if we try and get down to the detail and talking points, it's going to be a maintenance nightmare to keep it up to date and make sure that it's all synced and aligned.
Stacy?
Yeah, I agree. I think if you, adding talking points is sort of premature, so to speak, because until there's a discussion at some regional level about some issue, we don't have any idea what those talking points might be.
Thank you. I think this question highlights, we talked earlier about this motivation to be similar to like a legislative agenda, but this question kind of highlights where it's different. And our legislative agenda, very often there's very specific asks or issues, or maybe even agenda bills that we are supportive or not supportive, or there may be general category areas that we would support or not support. And the difference here, I think, we don't really know all the agenda items that's going to come in front of the regional boards and commissions, so with a lot less certainty. So if we're just doing this once a year, I think you get in. It's going to be a useful tool when there. I think when I'm not sure strategic guidance is the right phrase. To me, they are somewhat policy statements. And those can be broad, but they can be directionally. They can state what our preference is. So I'm not really sure if I understand what you mean by strategic guidance, and maybe that's what you mean, or maybe I should just ask you to explain that a little bit further. But I think some of the examples that we have in there are really policy positions. Let's say the one on the urban growth boundary, for example. Hey, we looked at this and we said, do we want to have a policy position, and do we want to state it in there? And we did that. I think that structure is handy, and I would retain that. And if you have a reply to my question, your use of the phrase strategic guidance is that? Do you want to address that?
Yes, thank you. So strategic guidance in this case means something that's a little bit more high level, that's keeping things in terms of here's the general policy direction, or here's the general perspective or interest of Issaquah, versus something that is much more detailed, that I would say is more on that talking point level for when you're representing Issaquah and regional boards and commissions. So it's what we mean by talking points is where you are really trying to anticipate all of the topics that a certain regional board or committee could be trying to address in a given year during your appointment, or which I think, as council members pointed out, could lead to it being out of date rather quickly. So it's that level of detail that is a little bit more, or the guidance that is a little bit more evergreen versus something that we're going to need to update on a more than once annual basis.
All right, thank you. Comments or responses? Not? Yes, Lindsay.
I appreciate when looking at Renton's, while it would have to be updated as actions are taken, they have a specific, so if, one of their pages is dedicated to transportation, they have a specific section that talks about actions, and it specifically says, advocate to this board about this thing. And that to me provides a lot of clarity for future council members to say, not only do we care about transportation, here's the policies that we've adopted internally, here's kind of what that means for the city, here's the boards that are focused, but it specifically says, and these are the desired outcomes or who you should talk to about that. And I appreciate that type of specificity.
And of course, ours has an action area as well, right? We have objectives and then actions associated with. Some of them are very measurable. Vicki?
I was just thinking about the actions and the status part also. So I think, for me, I think it would be helpful, the actions are, having the actions there is helpful, having the status there is helpful. Right now, sometimes the status and the actions seem sort of like the same thing because it's, the action is that we're advocating for this, and then the status is that we're advocating for this. So there's some sort of where they're sort of saying the same thing. It might be more helpful if we had more, like Councilmember Walsh was saying, something more along the lines of, we are participating in this group and advocating for this particular topic. And so then it's sort of the status, and it's also action that we're doing, but it's in a more natural format, and it's also maybe more useful for a council member that's joining a regional conversation, for example.
All right, thank you. I do want to comment on the status part of ours is what didn't really work. Mm-hmm. It truly was supposed to be a status on an action, and that wasn't going to work because that's going to be more fluid. And this structure, the way it's put together, that just didn't work very well. So I don't know that in this final document there really needs to be a status. There may be at the time that we adopt it, but not the way this is written. You'd think it was going to be updated and maintained, and we had no intention of doing that.
Okay. So I think that's clear. I have clear direction on that. Thank you for that. And then we have no more questions. So I welcome any other comments or feedback in terms of what you would like this tool to do for you. So I want to give you the opportunity to do that at this time if you have anything else that we should be considering before our next meeting.
Not seeing any.
Okay, great. Then just another reminder for what the next step is here. So our second meeting on this topic we anticipate to be in September. So we've heard this feedback. We're going to be looking at the tool format, et cetera, and coming back to you with kind of a template and make sure that we heard you correctly. I'm sure there will be additional opportunities for discussion at that point, and all with the hopes that we finalize and adopt the draft in November to be able to guide the 2020 efforts and be used as a tool for council members in the year 2020.
All right, thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Jean, are you done too? All right. Well, thank you, Andrea. Thank you, Jean. I think that wraps up our agenda for this evening. Thank you, everybody, for your participation. Thank you, Stacy, for reminding me there's one more item. Does anybody have any reports on any regional activities or issues to share with the council this evening? I'm not seeing any. I did mention in my last regional report where I did more than just an agenda status thing on PSRC GMPP. You all know now that that is out, and we're in the comment period from that draft, and I'm still hoping that there is some way that, I really hope that as a city that we can put together some type of our own feedback on that, on the draft Vision 2050, and we have a 60-day period that started last Friday. So I know we need the administration to be driving that. Not that Emily cares anymore, but. All right, that was all I wanted to remind people about. Stacy, do you have something?
Just to make sure for people who are watching and just for the record that we did already provide some feedback. Yeah. Yeah.
It was limited in scope. All we had was the EIS, and now this has the full body of the full drafted policies and the regional growth strategy as well. So those weren't in what we had an opportunity to look at before.
Agreed. Just wanted to make sure that it's clear that we're not just like, oh, look at this thing coming out. You know, we've been aware of it.
Yeah, no, it was very good last time. That's all. Anybody else? Okay, so Stacy, is there anything else on the agenda?
I don't know, is there?
I don't believe so.
No.
Thank you, everybody. We are adjourned.